Warrior Lore. Chapter 3242. Haha, ignorant child. Second brother G laughs again, his eyes flashing with an ominous glint. Don't you think about it? I and the others have been here for several years. How many people more powerful than you have yet to make a move? How could a child like you know about this? Humph, I don't know about the actions of others. I only know that the people of the world care about the world's affairs. We wanderers naturally have to care about the world's injustice, get rid of the world's evil deeds. The scholar is not afraid at all. He coldly snorts and says righteously, I boast that I am not good at learning, but I read books, practice etiquette, cultivate righteousness, and hold a 3-foot-long sword, so I should move forward and get rid of the world's evil deeds. Although I can't do what the ancient proverb says, but if a bandit soldier commits an evil deed, I will kill him. If a bandit general commits an evil deed, I will also kill him. If we can't get rid of evil, what joy do we have in life? Laughing proudly in the world, getting rid of the universe, what fear do we have in death? Good. Xiaohua suddenly stood up from the carriage. This scholar's few words had instantly enlightened Xiaohua. His previous hesitation had all disappeared. He almost wanted to clap his hands and exclaim in admiration, Since you want to die, I will let you die. Killing a nameless scholar like you who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. I don't believe that the academy can find my mountain stronghold. Second brother G is furious. A man of character will not change his name. I am the wanderer Yu Zhongquan. The scholar's eyes flash with determination. He knows that this battle points to disaster, so he clenches his teeth and says word by word. When the scholar's name enters his ears, Xiao Hua's figure sways, and he almost falls down from the carriage. Yu Zhongquan? Xiao Hua is dumbfounded. A bitter face and a desolate call immediately flashes in his mind. Yu Zhongquan, wanderer, you, where are you? This is the end of the tragic love story of Little Cabbage in front of Tianmin Mountain, on the bank of the cold river, and also the last words of the malicious spirit Huang Yi before he fell into the cycle of reincarnation. Xiao Hua didn't expect that this story would actually appear in the hidden immortal continent. This Yu Zhongquan is it that Yu Zhongquan? Xiao Hua looked in that direction, inwardly pondering. Is it the ranger Yu Zhongquan that Huang Yi mentioned? See no indecent, hear no indecent, speak no indecent, move no indecent? However, since his name is Yu Zhongquan and he is a ranger, how can I just stand by and watch? Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes as the green light between his brows flourished. Ripples instantly appeared in the air as tens of thousands of lightning bolts began to move. But just as Xiao Hua was about to use the thunderclap lightning flash technique, his heart stirred. With a wave of his hand, a centipede that was several feet long and as thick as a fist flew out from the void. Right now, the Herculean centipede was completely different from before. On the black shell, there were some strange runes. These runes flashed with a faint black and gold light as the God Power centipede flew. The God Power centipede didn't have many legs before, but now they were even longer. Thick black smoke was coming out of each leg. The smoke supported the God Power centipede as it floated in the air. Looking at the two most eye-catching sword-like antennae on its head, the cold light had long disappeared. At the sharp ends of the antennae, curved runes spread all over the antennae and landed on the top of the Herculean centipede's head. At that place, a faint golden rune formed into a strange rune that looked like a tadpole. Go! Xiao Hua looked at the Herculean centipede and indifferently waved his hand. He wasn't afraid that the Herculean centipede wouldn't understand his meaning. Sure enough, as Xiao Hua waved his hand, a gust of wind blew as the Herculean centipede urged the black smoke to charge at Second Brother G. Second Brother G was also very powerful. He originally wanted to use his steel spear to kill Yu Zhongquan, but when he heard the wind, he immediately turned around. Seeing the Herculean centipede in the black cloud, he frowned and patted Yellow Ox. He pointed his steel spear at the sky and shouted, Which immortal friend from the black cloud ridge is here? Unfortunately, the Herculean centipede didn't talk to him at all. The black cloud was activated, and the air within a few feet was condensed into a beam. As the Herculean centipede attacked Second Brother G, Second brother Ji felt like he was suffocating. Ah! Second brother Ji was shocked. He tried his best to use his steel spear to stab the Herculean centipede. Crack! The steel spear touched the centipede's feeler. The tip of the spear slid slightly and was unable to exert any force. Moreover, an inhuman force came from the shaft of the spear, causing the spear to be sent flying. Second brother Ji was scared witless. He immediately wanted to retreat. However, before he could think of a second idea, he saw another black smoke streaking across the sky. The Herculean centipede's antennae easily split second brother Ji and his mount in half. A gust of blood instantly rushed into the air. Seeing second brother Ji abandon him to deal with the Herculean centipede, Yu Zhongquan was a bit embarrassed and angry. However, before he could fly forward again, second brother Ji, who was extremely powerful in his eyes, was killed by the Herculean centipede in a flash. Yu Zhongquan couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Immediately after, a cold thing swept past his body, making Yu Zhongquan's hair stand on end. He immediately raised his Qingfeng sword and prepared to be on guard. However, before he could raise his Qingfeng sword, the Herculean centipede actually flew up again. It rode the black cloud and rushed in another direction. It seemed that its target was another bandit general. Who is this? Yu Zhongquan let out a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to look around, a young man who wasn't much older than him suddenly appeared in front of him. He was so scared that he almost screamed. This young man stood in front of Yu Zhongquan and didn't say anything. He only looked at Yu Zhongquan from head to toe. Under his curious gaze, he almost stretched out his hand and tore Yu Zhongquan apart to take a look. Sensing this malicious gaze, the goosebumps that had just appeared on Yu Zhongquan's skin again. He hurriedly shrunk his neck and raised the Qingfeng sword. As if to boost his courage, he anxiously asked, "You, who are you?" This person was naturally Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua looked at Yu Zhongquan with a smile, as if he was looking at something very interesting. When he heard Yu Zhongquan's question, he smiled and said, "Don't ask this Xiao first. This Xiao will ask you, you are Yu Zhongquan. How old are you? Where do you live? Are you married? Do you have a wife named Huang Yi? Where did you come from and where do you want to go?" Yu Zhongquan was stupefied. He looked at Xiao Hua with extreme disbelief. He was simply drowned by Xiao Hua's questions. After a while, he finally reacted and said in a flustered and exasperated manner, "Is your brain damaged?" As he spoke, Yu Zhongquan walked past Xiao Hua in a few steps. He wanted to rush over and kill the mountain bandit, but strangely, Xiao Hua smiled and appeared in front of Yu Zhongquan like a ghost. He said with a smile, "Yu Zhongquan, if this Xiao's brain is damaged, then I'm afraid there isn't anyone in this world with a good brain. How about this? This Xiao sees that you are a talented person and wants to matchmake you. Tell me, what kind of girl do you like? How about this Xiao introduce a little cabbage to you?" "You, get out of the way." Yu Zhongquan's face was completely red. He pointed his Qingfeng sword at Xiao Hua's nose and said, "This one knows that you are not a mountain bandit, so this one will not sacrifice you to my sword. But if you continue to slander this one and continue to nag like this, don't blame this one for being impolite. AI, you really don't know what's good for you." Xiao Hua shrugged and retreated a few steps. He said helplessly, "This Xiao is the moon elder of the heavens. I fell into the mortal world and wanted to matchmake you a 10,000-year red string. If you are the moon elder, then this one is the sword immortal." Yu Zhongquan unhappily walked a few steps forward. As he spoke, his Qingfeng sword danced and rushed towards a mountain bandit. "Go wherever it's cool." All right. Xiao Hua clapped his hands and said with a smile, "The sky is cool. This Xiao will go to the sky and stay there." As he spoke, Xiao Hua activated his flying talisman and flew into the air. He sat there with interest. You can go wherever you want. What does it have to do with this one? Who would have thought that Yu Zhongquan would completely ignore him? His Qingfeng sword lifted the bandit's padao and stabbed towards the bandit's throat. The bandit's padao flashed. He originally wanted to defend and counterattack, but suddenly, panic flashed across the bandit's face. He actually did not dare to fight against Yu Zhongquan's Qingfeng sword and wanted to dodge. This bandit's underling was originally not Yu Zhongquan's opponent. If he fought with his life on the line, he might have been able to escape with his life. But now that he was so afraid, he only wanted to dodge. Naturally, after a few moves, his throat was stabbed by Yu Zhongquan and he died on the ground. Yu Zhongquan sneered. He ignored the blood on the tip of his sword and the bandit's eyes that were still open on the ground. He jumped up again and chased after another bandit. However, soon after, Yu Zhongquan was extremely puzzled as he discovered that he was really invincible. Not only did the sword light hit him, all the underlings were scared witless. Even before he could catch up, those bandits who saw his shadow also fled. This made him really excited. With righteousness in the chest, evil ghosts will be easily defeated. With righteousness in mind, one will fight 100 battles without hesitation. Yu Zhongquan could not help but roar towards the sky. He shouted with extreme joy, "Come, come, come! Who dares to fight 300 rounds with me?" At this moment, Yu Zhongquan had already reached the side of the carriages. The originally terrified shop assistant's face was now filled with ecstasy. He welcomed Yu Zhongquan and shouted, "Thank you, immortal master, for your kindness. You're welcome, you're welcome." Yu Zhongquan was in high spirits. The Qingfeng sword in his hand trembled slightly as he responded proudly. But suddenly, he seemed to have realized something. "What? Immortal master?" Yu Zhongquan suddenly turned around and saw Xiaohua standing with his hands clasped behind his back. He stood there with a smile, and there was an indescribable wretchedness in his eyes. Yes, the ranger Yu Zhongquan actually understood wretchedness in the eyes of the so-called Namo Guanyin Bodhisattva. You really are immortal master?" Yu Zhongquan's left hand trembled as he raised it. He pointed at Xiaohua and asked in shock. When Yu Zhongquan finished speaking, he felt that it was inappropriate. He hurriedly withdrew his hand and hid it behind his back. "This Xiao is a mortal master?" Xiaohua said with a smile. "Didn't I just tell you? This Xiao is the moon elder in the sky." Chapter 32-43. Young Master, Young Master. Just as Xiaohua and Yu Zhongquan were talking, there was a rush of horse hooves in the distance. An old man with white hair and beard was also riding a big cyan horse. He rushed over without a care for his life. Although the old man's face was full of fear, the concern in his eyes was obvious. Seeing that the old man was about to catch up, Yu Zhongquan's face showed a trace of unnaturalness. He hurriedly shouted, "Seventh uncle, I'm fine." Hearing Yu Zhongquan's impatient answer, the old man's eyes showed a trace of comfort. Then he shouted behind him, "You too. Hurry up and save the young master. If anything happens to the young master, this old man will peel your skin and pull out your tendons." Behind the old man, there were also 2 large green horses. Riding on the horses were 2 men dressed in tight clothes. These 2 men held the same green sword as Yu Zhongquan. Although these 2 men urged their horses with all their might, their horses were clearly not as spirited as the old man's horse. Although the 2 men said yes, they were still unable to surpass the old man. "You two don't want to live anymore?" Seventh uncle was furious. He was respectful to Yu Zhongquan, but he was not polite to these 2 family guards. "Seventh uncle," the guard on the left smiled bitterly, "you are chasing the young master without a care for your life. This little one is also worried about the young master, but you gave the most handsome Jue Feng to the young master. This little one can't catch up." "That's right, seventh uncle," the guard on the right whispered. "Didn't you see that there is an immortal next to the young master? With that old man, wouldn't he be 100 times more useful than us?" "Fart, fart," seventh uncle shouted. "Taoists are all deceiving things. Even if that person has some skills, how can he be more assured than are you family? If you two don't go and protect him, this old man will break your legs." The 2 family guards smiled bitterly and hurriedly urged their cyan horses. Unfortunately, no matter how hard they tried, the horses were not enough. In the end, they only arrived with seventh uncle. At this moment, Yu Zhongquan was no longer in high spirits like before. He was somewhat listless as he drooped his head and stood beside Xiaohua. Xiaohua had already landed, but he could clearly see that it wasn't because of him, but because of the old man who hadn't arrived yet. Sure enough, when the old man arrived before them, he didn't even bother to greet them. Instead, he immediately leaped to Yu Zhongquan's side and ran his hands all over Yu Zhongquan's body to make sure that he wasn't missing an arm or a leg. Only then did he let out a long sigh of relief and said earnestly, "Little young master, you are the precious treasure of our Yu clan, a piece of meat in our old ancestor's heart. Once you go out, seventh uncle." Yu Zhongquan's face turned red. He stole a glance at Xiao Hua, who was still standing in the air, and complained, "There's a senior expert here. You should speak less." "Sigh, young master. It's not that this old servant wants to criticize you." Who would have thought that once Yu Zhongquan spoke, seventh uncle would become even more long-winded? "This old servant has eaten more salt than you have eaten rice. This old servant has walked more bridges than you have walked on roads. What kind of swindler has this old servant not seen? In the past, there were many Taoist priests who came to our Yu clan to eat and drink. Which one of them didn't bow to this old servant when they saw him? This old servant is very clear about their tricks. You sneaked out without telling your family. If this old servant hadn't discovered you early..." "Seventh uncle." Yu Zhongquan's face turned completely green. His deception of claiming to be a ranger was inadvertently exposed by seventh uncle. Yu Zhongquan's face suddenly disappeared. He didn't even have the courage to look at Xiao Hua. He quickly walked towards his scion horse. "Little young master, little young master." The two family guards hurriedly stood in front of Yu Zhongquan and pleaded, "If you return home, we will serve you on your horse. If you don't return to see your wife, we won't dare." Scram. Hearing his wife, Yu Zhongquan's face turned completely black. He angrily said, "This Zhue Feng is this young master's mount. You dare not let this young master get on his horse?" "Seventh uncle, seventh uncle," a fat family guard anxiously said, "if little young master gets on Zhue Feng, we won't be able to catch up." Cough, cough. Seventh uncle coughed twice. He glanced at Xiao Hua beside him and lightly said, "This Taoist priest, this is my Yu clan's private matter. It seems you can't stay here and watch, right? Although you're not a Confucian cultivator and don't know about seeing and hearing indecent things, there's no need for you to stay here and watch the show, right?" "Ha ha ha, indeed, indeed." Xiao Hua looked at Yu Zhongquan with interest. It seemed the difference between what he thought and Yu Zhongquan was too far. He laughed several times and flew away. "Humph, swindler." Seventh uncle glanced at Xiao Hua and then turned to Yu Zhongquan and said, "Little young master, if you want to hide for a few days, we can just treat it as playing." Xiao Hua, who had been reprimanded as a swindler, was flying in the air. Everywhere he looked, there were bandits fleeing in a sorry state. Behind these bandits, there were dozens of bodyguards shouting and chasing after them. They seemed to be extremely happy. Above these bandits, the god power centipede was riding a black cloud. From time to time, it would swoop down. If it wasn't a flash of black light cutting the bandits into pieces, it would be like a black arrow piercing through the bandits' bodies. Wherever the black cloud went, it was truly invincible. No one dared to fight it. Hee hee. Xiao Hua proudly looked at the god power centipede's devastation. He secretly said, "With this Xiao's identity, I naturally can't lower myself to the same level as these bandits." But this fake ranger who ran away from home said it well. "If the bandits commit evil deeds, I will kill them. If the bandits commit evil deeds, I will also kill them. Although these bandits can't take a single blow from this Xiao, how can I easily let them off with their evil deeds? This god power centipede, and little black and little yellow can help this Xiao. Anyway, there are a lot of evil spirits in this hidden, immortal continent. Adding a few more of them won't make a difference." At this time, 3 of the 4 strongholds leaders had already been killed by the god power centipede. The last one was still fighting with Yuanya. However, looking at the panic on the fake monk's face and his scattered moves, it was likely that his mind had already collapsed. It was only a matter of time before he was defeated by Yuanya. The managers of the several companies, including Qi Jin, had already ordered the workers to tidy up the carriages and check the goods. They were ready to wait for the escorts to come back. As for Xiao Jian, His eyes followed the god power centipede as it flew up and down. He stared at it without blinking. It seemed that he was both confused and envious. Woo! With a sharp cry, the god power centipede seemed to have lost its target. It turned a few times in the air and rushed to the fat monk's head. The fat monk's face immediately turned pale. Taking advantage of this moment, Yuanya rushed close to the fat monk. He waved his magic wand and hit the fat monk's shoulder. Bang! With a muffled sound, the fat monk screamed miserably. Under this attack, the fat monk's shoulder bone was broken. He no longer had the strength to lift the weapon in his hand. The fat monk hurriedly shook the donkey and wanted to escape with the donkey. "Where are you going?" Yuanya roared. He jumped up and waved his magic wand at the fat monk's back. The fat monk was about to be killed by Yuanya. Pfff. The sound of a fart as loud as spring thunder came from the donkey's tail. An incomparably foul smell mixed with black gas rushed towards Yuanya. Even the donkey's tail was like an iron rod that struck towards Yuanya's chest. Bang! Yuanya was scared out of his wits. He only had time to use his magic wand to block the donkey's tail. He himself fell to the ground with a fart that he had never heard before. His face turned black and green. Damn it, they are all weirdos. Xiao Hua was unable to stand steadily in the air again. The incomparably powerful Yuanya was actually knocked out by the fart of the donkey. I wonder what he will think when he wakes up. Ouch, slow down. Since Yuanya was knocked out, the god's powered centipede naturally couldn't stand it. Without waiting for Xiao Hua's orders, it immediately rushed down. The fat monk, who was already weak and numb, couldn't resist the god's powered centipede at all. Xiao Hua still wanted to keep the strange little donkey, but it was already too late. Of course, Yuanya was poisoned by the strange little donkey and not simply fainted. However, in front of Xiao Hua, this little bit of poison was nothing. A detoxification pill was enough to wake Yuanya up. However, contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, Yuanya's face wasn't more interesting than Yu Zhongquan's face. Instead, it was calm, as if being fainted by the fart of the donkey wasn't an extremely embarrassing thing. Ouch, this old man understands. Yuanya himself grew up in the forest. In his eyes, donkeys. Are there any differences between humans and donkeys? Xiao Hua, who was watching the show, suddenly slapped his forehead and came to a realization. Since the 4 bandit generals were killed, the escorts who stayed behind to guard the carriages immediately sent out a signal. The escorts who were chasing after the bandits immediately gave up on their targets and returned. Their mission was to protect the carriages of the trading company, not to kill the bandits. Killing bandits was the job of the soldiers. The king of Jiasa country didn't pay them any money. However, all the escorts looked at the god's powered centipede with fear when they returned. In this battle, the one who deserved the most credit was naturally the god's powered centipede. The 4 bandit generals were beheaded, and more than 10 powerful bandits were killed by the god's powered centipede. If it weren't for the god's powered centipede, the escorts who represented justice wouldn't have been able to obtain victory. The escorts, who were the first to be dissatisfied with Xiao Hua and then disdainful of Xiao Jian and the others, suddenly discovered their own shallowness. Their hearts filled with fear and anxiety, they each began to make their own plans. As soon as they returned to the side of the carriage, they began to discuss. Not long after, Qi Jin was pushed out by the crowd. He walked in front of Xiao Hua with a smile on his face. At this moment, Xiao Hua had just put the god's powered centipede into his space. He looked at Qi Jin with some confusion. "Senior Immortal," Qi Jin said cautiously. Although Senior Immortal disdained to make a move, Senior Immortal's spirit pet was very brave. It saved our trading company from the bandits. We just discussed that. We are willing to pay half of the celestial stones we won from Senior Immortal's disciple. -11. Chapter 32:44. No need. Xiao Hua smiled faintly. This old man has no disciple. The evil in this world must be dealt with by the righteous people. This old man killed these bandits because of this old man's actions. There's no reason for me to ask you for a reward. Yes. Seeing that Xiao Hua didn't accept it, Qi Jin was a bit embarrassed. He knew that Xiao Hua didn't want to interfere with their matters with Xiao Jian, so he answered while walking to Xiao Jian's side. As for how Xiao Jian would respond, Xiao Hua didn't care. Because at this time, the so-called Ranger Yu Zhongquan seemed to have reached some agreement with the Yu family's seventh uncle. Under the seventh uncle's lead, he came to Xiao Hua. Seventh uncle cupped his hands and said, "This old man is Yi Feng country's Yu family's servant, Yu Qi. Greetings to Taoist Xiao. From what my family's young master said, it was you who saved him. This old man was a bit slow in treating you. May I know where your Taoist temple is? This old man will report this matter to my family's head and ask him to send people to your Taoist temple to rebuild the Taoist temple and reconstruct the Taoist's golden body." Seeing seventh uncle flaunting his seniority and hearing seventh uncle call himself old man, Xiao Hua smiled and returned the greeting. Old man is too polite. This Xiao doesn't deserve such a great reward. Moreover, this Xiao is also a wild crane with no place to stay. This Xiao appreciates old man's kindness. How can that be? Seventh uncle didn't give up. He shook his head and said, "My Yu family is a great scholarly family. My ancestors have passed down poems and books. Everyone in Yi Feng country knows that my Yu family rules with etiquette. If you don't repay such a great favor, how can my Yu family face the world?" Damn it. Xiao Hua saw that every word of seventh uncle's was a great scholarly family. Even if he didn't ask for repayment, he would tarnish the Yu family's reputation. He couldn't help but mutter in his heart. However, he waved his hand and said, "Old man's words are wrong." Oh? Seventh uncle was surprised and asked curiously, "What advice does Taoist have?" Although this Xiao isn't a scholarly cultivator, I admire the righteous spirit of scholarly cultivators. Just a few moments ago, the young master of the noble clan was facing hundreds of bandits and the leader of the bandits whom he could not resist at all. The young master said, "Read books, practice etiquette, cultivate righteousness, and hold a 3-foot sword. Then, we should move forward courageously and sweep away all evil in the world." Such words are like divine thunder from the 9 heavens that awakened this Xiao. He is only a scholar in his teens, but he can rely on the righteous spirit to reach the realm of, even if there are tens of thousands of people, I will still go forward. Isn't that the ranger in this Xiao's heart? Wasn't he one of the rare and magnificent men in the world? This Xiao is only fighting the enemy together with him. So what help is there? Old Sir is worried about the face of the scholarly cultivator clans, but I still have to worry about the face of my Dao sect. In the future, Old Sir must not mention this matter again. Xiao Hua's words made seventh uncle's face glow. He naturally didn't know about Yu Zhongquan's performance. Although he looked down on the declining Dao sect and looked down on Xiao Hua did save Yu Zhongquan after all. At this time, he even praised Yu Zhongquan in such a lofty manner. His heart was already blooming with joy. He couldn't even close his mouth as he said with a smile, "Taoist Xiao is really exaggerating. Little Gongzi is still young and hasn't learned the true meaning of our Confucian cultivation. This is merely what I heard eldest Gongzi and my master often talk about. Words can be imitated, but righteous spirit is irreplaceable." Xiao Hua disagreed, facing the leader of the bandits who could easily kill him. Your noble young master stepped forward bravely. This is definitely not some simple matter of hearing and seeing. It's all because your sect has taught your son well. Alas, seventh uncle didn't expect Xiao Hua to actually hold Confucian cultivators and his Yu family in such high esteem. It seemed that Xiao Hua didn't have any barrier between Dao sect and Confucian cultivators. He was very happy in his heart and looked at Xiao Hua a lot more pleasing to the eye. When he heard Xiao Hua's last words, he couldn't help but sigh. Taoist Xiao may not know, but this old man has watched little Gongzi grow up. Think of the little baby who peed on this old man's neck when he was young. Seventh uncle. Yu Zhongquan's face was as red as a red cloth. He threatened, "If you keep talking, I'll leave." Okay, I won't say. Seventh uncle was full of smiles, as if he had forgotten his previous vigilance. He asked Xiao Hua, "Where is Taoist Xiao going? If you have time, how about we go together?" Hee. Xiao Hua laughed and replied, "This Xiao wants to go to Bronze Pillar State, but I don't know if I'm going the same way as you." Before seventh uncle could speak, Yuanya walked back and handed over the cleaned magic wand to Xiao Hua. He said respectfully, "Thank you for the weapon, Taoist Xiao." And Xiao Hua took it and put it into his space. He looked at Yu Zhongquan and smiled. "Yuanya, this is Yu Zhongquan, the descendant of Yifeng State's great Confucian. You didn't see him when you were fighting just now. He actually dared to fight a bandit leader by himself. His courage is definitely out of the ordinary. I'm Yu Zhongquan. Greetings, fellow Taoist." Yu Zhongquan had already seen Yuanya, who fought the fat monk. Yuanya's bravery made him admire him. Now that he had the chance, how could he not know how to befriend him? He hurriedly bowed and said, "I'm Yu Zhongquan." Although Yuanya wasn't good with words, hearing Yu Zhongquan's courage, he also looked at him in a new light and hurriedly returned the greeting. However, after the two greeted each other, they didn't know what to say after a few words. The scene was quite awkward. Xiao Hua waved his hand again. "Louis, Yuanya isn't good with words. Come over here. You're both young people. You should get to know each other." "Yes, Taoist priest." Louis didn't dare to move around in the carriage for fear of causing trouble. Now that he heard the call, he hurriedly slipped down from the carriage. "Mighty." In front of the carriages, there were already shouts from the escort agency. Obviously, they were about to set off again. Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Old sir, please. Young people have their own topics. We have our own matters. How about we chat as we go?" Xiao Hua was very concerned about the matter between Yu Zhongquan and Huang Yi. Naturally, he also looked at the people of the Yu clan in a new light. He really wanted to get to know Yu Zhongquan better. Of the two Yu clan guards who didn't announce their names, one accompanied Yu Zhongquan, while the other led Zhue Feng, which Yu Zhongquan was riding before, over and asked Seventh Uncle to get on the horse. Seventh Uncle lifted his leg and got on the saddle horse. He said to Xiao Hua with a smile, "This old man is already old. I'm 82 years old. Taoist priest Xiao has the ability to retain one's youthful appearance. This old man can't see how old Taoist priest is compared to this old man." Xiao Hua was a bit hesitant. After thinking for a bit, he smiled and said, "Old Sir's age is really not young. However, Old Sir's skills are vigorous and not inferior to ordinary people. Even if you say you're 60 years old, this Xiao would still believe it." "Ha ha ha," Seventh Uncle laughed heartily. "This old man only received the clan head's generous gift to practice the clan's secret arts. Although I can't achieve great success and can't sweep away the demons in the region like the little Gongzi and the others, but when it comes to condensing qi and blood, there's no harm in moving nimbly. Otherwise, how could the heavy responsibility of following the little Gongzi fall on this old man's shoulders? Besides, this old man is nothing. My clan's previous clan head was over 100 years old, but he was still able to wield a 3-foot-long sword and kill the Xuanyang water bandits leader. That's what you call amazing." At this point, Seventh Uncle came to a realization and said with a smile, "That's right. At this point, this old man still hasn't asked for Taoist priest Zhao's name. Taoist priest Xiao also doesn't seem to have mentioned my age." Xiao Hua sighed. Looking at Seventh Uncle's somewhat arrogant smile, he didn't know how to answer. It seemed that the so-called desire to win or lose wasn't only commonly seen in battles and gambling, it was also commonly seen in ordinary speech. It wouldn't wear out because of a person's age. Or perhaps Seventh Uncle felt that he didn't have Xiao Hua's divine abilities and wanted to find a balance in these minor details. Xiao Hua just couldn't answer this question. Even he himself didn't know his true age. If he counted from the Dawn Rain continent's Shanghua Ming, perhaps he was close to 200 years old, right? However, even if Xiao Hua said the most reliable and also the shortest age at this time, would Seventh Uncle believe him? "My surname is Xiao and my given name is Hua. This year." At this point, Xiao Hua faintly smiled. "I already don't know how old I am this year. I only know that the last time I went into seclusion was 100 years ago." At this point, Xiao Hua suddenly remembered that he didn't know how long it had been since he entered the Eye of the Sea and woke up in front of the river and tide temple several dozen days ago. Seventh Uncle stared blankly, then immediately smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "Taoist priest Xiao is truly a deity. This old man admires you." Ha ha ha. Xiao Hua also laughed heartily and casually cupped his hands. He knew in his heart that seventh uncle's deity didn't mean that he was a deity in cultivation, but rather a deity who bragged. He didn't mind. Wasn't his true situation what Xiao Jian, this so-called Taoist priest, often bragged about? He also didn't need to explain anything to seventh uncle. The carriages continued to move forward. Lu Yi, Yuanya, and Yu Zhongquan were chatting at the front. From time to time, some laughter could be heard. Seventh uncle looked at Yu Zhongquan's beaming face and felt happy in his heart. He unconsciously told Xiaohua everything that Yu Zhongquan didn't want to say. The Yu family was a scholarly family of Yifeng country. It could be said that the entire Yifeng country was supported by the Yu family. Even the king of Yifeng country had to bow his head and greet the Yu family. The Yu family had many heirs and many side branches. Yu Zhongquan was the youngest among the main branches. Yu Zhongquan was exceptionally intelligent since childhood. He was familiar with poetry and books at a very young age. When he was a little older, he had thoroughly read the classics of the scholarly families. He would often put forward his own unique views and was doted on by the family head. Furthermore, he was also expected to produce another great grandmaster in the Yu family, or even a literary sage. Unfortunately, Yu Zhongquan's cultivation path was out of everyone's expectations. When he first stepped on the path of refining essence into qi, it was very easy, but when he started cultivating, it was abnormally difficult. Others used a day's effort, but he could only use 10 days to achieve it. The true qi in his chest couldn't be refined and purified. Now, he was already 14 or 15 years old, but he was still in the realm of a scholar. This was still nothing. After all, the Yu family had many scholarly disciples. What kind of situation hadn't they seen before? They also had corresponding secret techniques to deal with it. But what puzzled others the most was Yu Zhongquan's ambition. Yu Zhongquan wanted to be a ranger, not the great grandmaster that the Yu family had in mind. What was a ranger? The ranger that seventh uncle spoke of was very different from what Xiaohua thought. -11. Chapter 32:45. What was a ranger? A ranger sounded very awe-inspiring. In the eyes of many people, it was a swordsman who traveled all over the world, upholding justice and helping the weak. Many of the chivalrous stories passed down by word of mouth in the secular world were also related to rangers. Rangers were almost synonymous with justice in people's minds. However, in fact, in the eyes of Confucian cultivators, especially in the eyes of those great Confucian families, rangers were synonymous with debauches. They were people who couldn't cultivate Confucian cultivation techniques and couldn't practice sword qi. They could only rely on their mediocre swordsmanship and wander around, idling around. In the eyes of great Confucian scholars, these people were all poor and destitute, abandoned children who couldn't accomplish anything. In short, they were a group of Confucian cultivators who didn't care for their grandparents and didn't love their uncles. They were a different branch of Confucian cultivators, but in fact, in the eyes of Confucian cultivators, they were just wild foxes. In particular, these rangers didn't care about etiquette, morality, honor, and shame. They were like male dogs in heat, teasing good women everywhere, destroying their chastity, and then patting their hands. They once again wandered around the world. They even said that they were in love with each other, so there was no need to spend all their time together. Rangers are the scum of us Confucian cultivators. Listening to seventh uncle's somewhat teeth-gnashing shout, Xiaohua almost thought that some of seventh uncle's women had an affair with the rangers. However, after listening to seventh uncle's words, he finally understood that it wasn't seventh uncle's personal grudge with the rangers, but a group of great Confucian families who followed the rules and regulations of this free and undisciplined lifestyle. Confucian cultivators are upright cultivators between heaven and earth. Oh, Taoist Xiao, it's not that this old man wants to slander your Taoist school, but Taoist school steals the essence of heaven and earth for their own use, not thinking of giving back to heaven and earth for marriage, which is exactly what we Confucian cultivators despise. The disciples of Confucian cultivators should read the books of the sages, no etiquette, no right and wrong, hold the outline of heaven and earth, and follow the rules of heaven and earth. Use the outline of heaven and earth to rule the world. Conduct yourself properly, and don't use the thoughts in your heart to kill. Seventh uncle looked at Xiao Hua with some disdain and said, even if you want to eliminate evil and punish evil, you should use the methods of Confucian cultivators to punish and not use your own evil. Rule by law, rule by law. This is the difference between us Confucians and you Taoists. Hiss. Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. Although he could also be considered a Confucian cultivator, and his Confucian cultivation was even higher than Seventh Uncle's, this was the first time he had heard words that integrated the principles of heaven and earth into people's daily actions and into the management of a country. Although Seventh Uncle's words were not without bias, Xiao Hua still felt as if he had been enlightened. He had already realized this when he was in the Dawn Rain continent. There weren't any restrictions between the three kingdoms of cultivation. Ordinary cultivators would draw their swords against each other from time to time and kill each other for their treasures. There were countless cases of greed at the sight of wealth. Isn't this just the lack of the Confucian cultivation method that Seventh Uncle mentioned? This Dharma was like the heavenly Tao of Taoism. All kinds of cultivation were under the heavenly Tao. One could comprehend the heavenly Tao, but one could not provoke the heavenly Tao. The Dharma of Confucianism was the heavenly Tao. If one violated the Dharma, they would be punished by the Dharma. Naturally, the heavenly Tao was far grander than the Dharma. The Dharma was merely a small shadow of the heavenly Tao under the governance of Confucianism. Seeing Xiao Hua's expression change, Seventh Uncle said proudly, although this old man is not good at our Confucian cultivation method, I often read the historical records of our Yu clan's ancestors. From the ancient history, Taoism didn't follow the rules, didn't know etiquette, and didn't establish the Dharma. This was why they lost their own rules. If you say they were annihilated by our immortal and Buddhist sects, it would be better to say they lost their way. They lost their direction of survival under your so-called heavenly Tao. Seeing that Seventh Uncle was talking nonsense again, Xiao Hua smiled and said, Old sir, some of your words are indeed enlightening and deafening. This Xiao can't deny it. However, if you want to generalize and use Dharma to cover up the annihilation of Taoism, it's not appropriate. No matter if it's Confucianism, Buddhism, or Taoism, they are all cultivation paths between heaven and earth. Although their paths are different, their directions and goals are not necessarily different. Since each of them can exist, they naturally have their own reasons for existing. Old sir, you're pointing out the annihilation of Taoism right now. Your words have evidence, but maybe there are other reasons. You're pointing out the annihilation of Confucianism and Buddhism with similarly conclusive evidence? Nonsense. Seventh Uncle felt that Xiao Hua was speechless and was acting shamelessly here. He smiled and said, no matter where it is, Dharma is the epitome of heavenly Tao. Everything must be done under Dharma. As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something. He pointed behind him and said, take those bandits from before for example. Exterminating bandits is an act of the country, the duty of the officers and soldiers. What we need to do is to capture them and send them to the government, not to let you kill them yourself. Oh, that's right. This old man was talking to you about the ranger. This ranger carries on your Taoism's idea of freedom. He does whatever he wants and doesn't respect Dharma. As the saying goes, a ranger uses martial arts to break the law. A ranger only emphasizes martial arts, not Dharma. He kills as he pleases. How can he enter the Hall of Elegance? This, Xiao Hua touched his nose and said with a bitter smile, as far as this Xiao knows, these bandits seem to have some connections with the government. If we send them to the government, it may not be of any use. Even if someone sends them to the government, I'm afraid that they will suffer some kind of retaliation. Moreover, if this Xiao only wants to capture these bandits, there will certainly be some misgivings. The difficulty will also increase. Since they have blood on their hands, why can't this Xiao enforce justice on behalf of heaven? Who are you? No matter who you are, you're only a human. You're a Taoist. What qualifications do you have to enforce justice on behalf of heaven? What evidence do you have that they have blood on their hands? If you kill them, won't you be the same as them? Seventh Uncle seemed to have been prepared for this and asked several questions in succession. This, Xiao Hua rubbed his nose until it was somewhat red. He really didn't know how to answer. As for the government colluding with them, that's just your guess. Even if it's true, it's just the actions of some scum in the government. All the more reason you should hand this matter over to their king, and let their king punish them according to the law. Seventh uncle lectured again. When it came to speaking, Xiaohua had always been weak. He didn't understand the ancient records of Confucian cultivators and so on. At this time, he was even more unable to answer. In his opinion, if he wanted to answer, it could only be the words of Buddhism. If I don't enter the cycle of reincarnation, who will enter the cycle of reincarnation? Taking all the sins on oneself, let's see how Confucian cultivators deal with it. It was a pity that Xiaohua wasn't bald. He feared that he wouldn't be able to answer in such a way to convince seventh uncle. At this time, Yu Zhongquan, who had been eavesdropping from the front, faintly said, "Seventh uncle, what should you say about Confucian using literature to violate the law?" When seventh uncle heard this, he was so angry that his beard blew and his eyes widened. He angrily said, "This old man only knows that heroes use martial arts to violate the law. The laws of this world are all made by us Confucian cultivators. Who would use literature to interfere? There's no need to mention this kind of nitpicking theory." Speaking up to here, seventh uncle said, "Little Gongzi, my Yu family is a great Confucian cultivator family. There are many ancient records in our family. You only need to read the books of the sages in our family. Why don't you look at the teachings of other schools?" Who would have thought that Yu Zhongquan wouldn't pay attention to seventh uncle at all? He only said one sentence and hooked up with Louis again. Louis had always been clever. He was very congenial with Yu Zhongquan. The two of them talked passionately. If it weren't for the fact that they were on the main road, the two of them would have already beheaded a chicken and burned yellow paper. Although Yuanya didn't speak much, Louis would ask him from time to time, so he didn't seem lonely. Alas, this child. Seventh uncle couldn't help but smile bitterly. He's always so unconvinced. No wonder old madam wants to arrange a marriage for him. Oh. When he heard about Yu Zhongquan's marriage, Xiaohua's eyes lit up. He asked, "I wonder which family's young lady is worthy of your noble son?" When it came to good things in the family, seventh uncle couldn't help but show off. He didn't need Xiaohua to ask and had already explained the matter clearly. Contrary to Xiaohua's expectations, this young lady's surname wasn't Huang, but Chang. She was the descendant of a great Confucian family in Xian country. She was well matched with the Yu family. Although the two families had the idea of marriage, the children of the two families were still young and didn't mention the agenda. Now that Xian country had an urgent matter that required Yifeng country's help, in order to find a suitable reason, Chang family took the initiative to propose marriage. Since Yu family had the intention of forming an alliance, the two families hit it off and settled this marriage. Yifeng country could legitimately send troops to Xian country. This was originally a good thing that would benefit both the country and the family. However, when it came to Yu Zhongquan, it was tantamount to a bolt from the blue. He had always had the ideal of being a ranger. He hoped to wield a 3-foot-long sword and sweep away all the injustices in the region. Now that he was trapped by marriage, how could he allow himself to be captured? Therefore, before the engagement ceremony was completed, he fled from home. Yu family's old ancestor felt sorry for Yu Zhongquan, so he sent seventh uncle and 2 family guards to protect him. He also brought Zhue Feng along. When seventh uncle caught up to Yu Zhongquan, he naturally gave Zhue Feng to Yu Zhongquan, who knew that Yu Zhongquan would ride a horse and flee. Seventh uncle and the other 2 chased after him bitterly. If they hadn't been robbed by bandits, the 3 of them probably wouldn't have been able to catch up to Yu Zhongquan. Ha ha ha, with little friend Yu's character. As long as you practice a little more in the future, this Confucian cultivator's flying sword will definitely reach great success. Old sir doesn't need to be too worried. Xiaohua laughed heartily when he heard this and looked at Yu Zhongquan with interest. Although Yu Zhongquan wasn't a ranger right now, and didn't even have the means of a ranger, he was able to pull out a sword at a critical moment. Others could call him stupid or rash, but Xiaohua just happened to like this kind of righteous person. For this kind of person who would rather throw away his life for his own ideals, how bad could his character be? Hearing Xiaohua mention the Confucian cultivator's flying sword, seventh uncle sneered and said without any trace of politeness, "Taoist priest must also have some magical powers. But do you know what the real magical powers of us Confucian cultivators are? It's not those people who hold a treasure sword. Nor are it those swordsmen who step on a flying sword and spit out a flying sword to take a person's head from 1,000 miles away. It's those great scholars who set the universe with a single word and soar to the 9 heavens. My Yu family's little Gongzi didn't walk on the righteous path of Confucian cultivators, but why did he walk on the path of flying sword? Oh? Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and said curiously, I can understand a single word and soar to the 9 heavens, but what about setting the universe with a single word? -11. Chapter 32:46. The world is deteriorating day by day, and people's hearts are no longer what they used to be. People have always been opportunistic and eager for quick success. Seventh uncle snorted. Even Confucian cultivators can't help but be contaminated. They gave up on the great magical powers of their ancestors and only focused on weapons. The sharpness of weapons, the heart of people, and the skillfulness of power can hurt the heavens. Although the flying sword is sharp, it is too frivolous. If people today are opportunistic, I won't take it. The reason why we Confucian cultivators are called Confucians is because we use words and literature as the foundation, qi and blood as the bones. This kind of magical power is the real magical power of Confucian cultivators. Xiao Hua was confused and asked curiously, could it be that reading words and literature can defeat the enemy? Why not? Seventh uncle said proudly, the mighty power of Confucian cultivators can defeat ghost qi with just words and kill evil spirits with a single word. See? Xiao Hua suddenly realized and almost lost his voice. I finally understand. Of course, at the bank of Liao River, Imo Jinli took out a small book. After opening it, hundreds of armor inscriptions bloomed inside. Weren't these armor inscriptions hitting the shrimp soldiers and crab generals like talismans? However, Mo Jinli didn't have enough energy, so those armor inscriptions couldn't exert more power, so they didn't show anything. Armor inscriptions, green seal inscriptions, gold seal inscriptions. Xiao Hua sighed in his heart. Yes, since the green seal inscriptions have earth-shattering power, and the gold seal inscriptions can also have the power of Buddhist mantras in the mouth of Buddha relics, then why can't the armor inscriptions? Oh, Taoist priest. You know the power of Confucian cultivators? Seventh uncle was a little surprised. Xiao Hua smiled and told him about Imo Jinli's book. Seventh uncle nodded slightly and said with a smile, I understand. The power of the armor inscriptions is passed down from ancient times. That book is the ancient imperial weapon of Confucian cultivators. It is preserved in some Confucian sections. It is one of the magical powers that I mentioned. What I said is also commonly used by Confucian families, but it is different. As he spoke, seventh uncle raised his hand and carefully took out a scroll from his bosom. He waved it in front of Xiao Hua's eyes and said with a smile, if I hadn't met Taoist priest earlier, I would have relied on this scroll if I wanted to rescue young Master Xiao from the hands of the bandits. Oh, this item. Xiao Hua scanned it with his divine sense and felt that this scroll was filled with a kind of overwhelming righteous energy. This righteous energy was like a sharp sword, and the scroll was basically unable to contain it. Can I take a look? Xiao Hua asked curiously. Of course. As seventh uncle spoke, he opened his hand, and the so-called scroll opened in the wind. Hiss! Xiao Hua looked at the slowly unfolding scroll, and his pupils shrank. It was a scroll that was 1 foot wide and 3 feet long. Inside the scroll, there was the word, one written in a flamboyant style. This word was not the inscription armor, but the common language of the hidden immortal continent. However, the strokes of this word were like swords, and it contained a great righteousness. Instead of saying that it was written on the scroll, it was better to say that it was floating on it. The scroll trembled slightly, and the word seemed like it was going to fly out. Even someone as strong as Xiao Hua felt a kind of tyranny in his eyes, and a kind of suppressive fierceness came from the word. It was as if he was slightly unconvinced, it would fly out and attack. How is it? Seventh uncle smiled and said, Taoist priest doesn't seem to be an evil person. Otherwise, this scroll wouldn't need to be activated by qi or true qi. and it would automatically attack. If it was before, as long as I opened this scroll, the bandit leader would definitely turn into ashes in this word. Xiao Hua scanned the word with his divine sense, and a kind of strong repulsive force was born. He nodded and said, "The power of Confucian cultivators really exceeded my expectations. This great Tao really is endless. I still have a lot to learn." Ha ha ha. Seventh uncle couldn't understand what Xiao Hua was saying. How could he know that Xiao Hua himself was also a Confucian cultivator? He laughed loudly and said, "Unfortunately, Taoist priest has already entered the evil path and is going further and further away. If Taoist priest goes into seclusion for another 100 years, you won't even see this word." It seemed that seventh uncle didn't believe Xiao Hua's words of seclusion for 100 years. Ha ha ha, it seems like that's really the case. Xiao Hua didn't expose him and laughed as well. He watched seventh uncle carefully put away the scroll. There was no greed in his eyes. Seventh uncle also seemed to have realized that his expression when looking at Xiao Hua was a bit different from before. After all, with Xiao Hua's cultivation level that could save Yu Zhongquan, it wasn't necessarily impossible for him to snatch this scroll. Seventh uncle's heart, which had been worried for a long time, finally calmed down. After talking for a long time and walking for a long time, it was time to rest. The Yu family's guards had already prepared some dried meat and offered it to Yu Zhongquan and seventh uncle. Seventh uncle naturally gave it to Xiao Hua politely, but Xiao Hua only smiled and shook his head. As for Yu Zhongquan, he naturally wanted to share the dried meat with Yuan Ye and Lu Yi, but he only saw the two shaking their heads. Yu Zhongquan was surprised and asked in a low voice. Lu Yi originally lied perfunctorily, but after hearing Xiao Hua's voice transmission, he didn't hide it and whispered to Yu Zhongquan. Yu Zhongquan's eyes lit up, and he looked back at Xiao Hua several times. Xiao Hua smiled and waved at Yu Zhongquan, hinting him to come over. Yu Zhongquan was also very generous. He walked over and bowed. "Immortal master, I heard that Taoists have immortal fruits that can stop one from eating for several days. I always thought that it was just a legend. Although I'm a great Confucian cultivator, after cultivating to a certain extent, I can also transcend the mortal world. But, little Gongzi," seventh uncle smiled and said, "I don't know whether Taoists have such things or not, but I know that master has already cultivated to the point where he doesn't need to eat. If you cultivate diligently, you can also achieve it. Grandpa is so hungry that he's skin and bones. In my opinion, it's better to eat more." Yu Zhongquan said disdainfully. "Little Gongzi." Seventh uncle felt a bit embarrassed and said anxiously, "How can you say that about master?" Xiao Hua naturally knew Yu Zhongquan's thoughts. Now that he was very rebellious, not only did he think that his little wife who hadn't married him was bad, he also thought that everything in his family was bad. He didn't cherish anything that Confucian cultivators had. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given up everything to become a ranger. Hee. Xiao Hua waved his hand and took out 2 spirit jujubes and handed them to Yu Zhongquan. He said with a smile, "These things are just snacks for me when I'm not hungry." Hee. "Thank you, immortal master." Yu Zhongquan took them and immediately put them to his mouth. He seemed to have heard Louis say that he could only eat them in small bites. However, he didn't eat them yet. He immediately handed the other spirit jujube to seventh uncle and said, "Seventh uncle, can you taste it for me first and see if it's poisonous?" Seventh uncle was originally very dissatisfied with Yu Zhongquan calling Xiao Hua immortal master, but seeing Yu Zhongquan being so filial, the dissatisfaction in his heart had already dissipated. He hurriedly waved his hand and said, "Little Gongzi, if you like it, you can eat it yourself." "Don't!" Yu Zhongquan shouted. "You came to protect me. If I accidentally take poison, how will you explain it to your family? You should eat it first." Okay. Seventh uncle's eyes were a little moist. He took the spirit jujube and was about to put it into his mouth. "Seventh uncle." Xiao Hua looked at the warm scene and said with a smile, "If this spirit jujube doesn't have true qi, you can only eat it in small bites. You can use the Confucian cultivation method to refine this spirit jujube. Of course, I don't know if it's possible." This seventh uncle was stunned. He classified Xiao Hua as a swindler. Just now, he earnestly taught him for a long time. Who would have thought that at this time, he would actually take out a spirit jujube? Seventh uncle knew what a spirit jujube was, but the Yu family was a Confucian family, so they were somewhat repulsed by Taoism. He always felt that using a spirit jujube was a heretical method. How could he take this kind of thing? Yu Zhongquan certainly understood what seventh uncle was thinking. He didn't care about it. He picked up the spirit jujube and took a small bite. While savoring the fragrance of the spirit jujube, he also felt the impact of the spirit jujube in his body. Wow! After a moment, Yu Zhongquan extremely exaggeratedly shouted, "Seventh uncle, if you don't eat it, you will regret it. This is even more delicious than the dragon saliva pear of Green Lotus Mountain." Hee. Seventh uncle only smiled and said, "If that's the case, why don't you thank Taoist priest?" Yes, thank you Taoist priest." Yu Zhongquan hurriedly said. His eyes were still staring at Xiaohua's sleeve. Looking at his greedy appearance, this was the temperament of a 14 or 15-year-old youth. How could he be a rebellious youth who left home to travel without permission? "I still have some. I'll give them to you together." Xiaohua was somewhat amused. With a wave of his hand, he took out a small handful and handed it to Yu Zhongquan. "But these things can't be eaten often." Why? Yu Zhongquan was wild with joy. He didn't understand why this Taoist priest, who he didn't know, was so fond of him. Xiaohua said in all seriousness, "It's very simple. Because after eating these, you won't want to eat the food of the secular world. You can't fast, so in the future, won't you starve to death?" Haha, this kid knows. Yu Zhongquan laughed heartily. He felt that Xiaohua's words were very interesting. He took these spirit jujubes and ran to Lu Yi and Yuan Ye's side, giving 2 or 3 to each of them. Xiaohua looked at seventh uncle again. He had already hidden the spirit jujubes, so Xiaohua didn't mention this and casually chatted with seventh uncle about Confucian cultivation. Seventh uncle seemed to have also seen Xiaohua's extraordinariness. His words in the future were not lacking in respect. Of course, regarding the secrets of Confucian cultivation, especially the appearance of the Chang family's little miss, seventh uncle avoided them deeply. Xiaohua couldn't ask more even if he wanted to. Very quickly, several days passed. Ahead of them, there was a fork in the road. One road went north, the other went east. The Sun Hai Trading Company's caravan was going north, which was the capital of Jiasa country, and the road to the east was going to Bronze Pillar country. Xiaohua naturally didn't want to go to Jiasa country's capital. He was somewhat anxious to go to Bronze Pillar country. He wanted to see the situation of the auction and see if there was anything he needed. Xiao Jin originally wanted to go to the auction, but now he had lost interest. He wanted to go to Jiasa country's capital to see the excitement. However, when he heard seventh uncle of the Yu family say goodbye to Xiaohua, saying that he wanted to go to Jiasa country's capital to visit the Yu family's relatives, Xiao Jin immediately changed his mind. Ever since he met Yu Zhongquan, seventh uncle talked with Xiaohua while sizing up the surroundings. Xiao Jin was immediately listed as a swindler by seventh uncle. -11. Chapter 32:47. At first, seventh uncle was abnormally vigilant towards Xiaohua, and he was even more aggressive towards Xiao Jin. However, after several encounters, Xiao Jin distanced himself from seventh uncle. Other than Yuan Ye, who would sometimes approach Xiao Jin to greet him, only Qi Jin would often strike up a conversation with Xiao Jin. In short, Xiao Jin was very lonely on this journey. It was as if he was walking on pins and needles. It was uncomfortable, as if there was a pair of eyes behind him that wanted to see through him. Now that he had the opportunity to get rid of these eyes, how could he not cherish it? After Xiaohua and the others bid farewell to everyone, the one who was reluctant to part was Yu Zhongquan. Xiaohua was really too good to him. Not only did he give him a lot of spirit jujubes, he even obtained a chant from Lu Yi for fasting. With Yu Zhongquan's intelligence, how could he not know that this was Xiaohua's tacit approval? If Xiaohua wasn't a Taoist cultivator, Yu Zhongquan would almost think that Xiaohua wanted to take him as a disciple. Even the thought of Xiaohua's little daughter growing up appeared in his mind. Looking at Yu Zhongquan and Lu Yi hugging each other as they bid farewell, Xiaohua smiled. Since he met Yu Zhongquan again, would he let him slip away? It's just a family of Confucian cultivators. Once he recovered his cultivation, he didn't need to do anything else. As long as he gave Yu Zhongquan a pair of ranger wings, wouldn't Yu Zhongquan obediently follow him? Huang Yi, Huang Yi. Xiao Hua turned his head and looked at the depths of the sky. This Xiao doesn't know where you are, whether it's the Netherworld or Xiaoyu continent. This Xiao also doesn't know whether this Yu Zhongquan is the Yu Zhongquan you're talking about. However, this Xiao was able to meet him. This Xiao has benefited a lot from you. In the future, this karma will fall on him. If the 9 heavens were in the 9 heavens, Xiao Hua suddenly laughed. If the 9 heavens were in the 9 heavens, wouldn't Huang Yi have already flown into a rage? Yu Zhongquan's little wife was actually a descendant of the great scholar surnamed Chang, and not Huang Yi. Xiao Jian finally came back to life. He was no longer as lifeless as before. He urged his horse beside Xiao Hua and whispered something. Apart from a smile, there was respect on his face. He now understood that Xiao Hua was definitely an unfathomable Taoist senior, not a spy like he thought from the beginning. Moreover, the word unfathomable was truly unfathomable. It wasn't the kind of word that he used to brush off others. However, after walking for more than 10 days, the surrounding scenery gradually changed. There were more and more low houses, more and more villages with smoke rising from chimneys, and even the road was much smoother and more spacious. Xiao Jian still didn't mention anything about the spirit jujube, as if he had never seen it before. Every once in a while, he would ask Yuanya to find some food for him to eat alone. Even his past and his wasted Taoist cultivation were not mentioned at all. This kind of stubbornness made Xiao Hua admire him, and some of the hatred from before lessened. Actually, humans were very complicated and had many sides. No matter what Xiao Jian's character was like, he would always have some good points. After more than 10 days, Xiao Hua and the others arrived in front of a large city. This large city was more than 10 zhang high, and the city walls were made of several feet of green bricks. There were some mottled brownish-black color in the gaps between the bricks, and there were also some dark green moss. The entire city wall wasn't particularly flat, and there were many potholes on the brick surface. The potholes were big and small, and the big ones were several feet wide, covering several large stones. The small ones were the size of a thumb and several inches deep. Between these potholes, there were hair-thin cracks connected together. In addition to the thick, brownish-black color accumulated in the gaps between the bricks, the potholes on the city wall were also the same color, giving off a heavy feeling. In particular, in this dusk, the dusk revealed itself from the ground and reflected on the city wall. The light and shadow were like a sad note on the city wall. On top of the city wall, there were many banners that stretched for miles. The flagpoles of these banners were as thick as a bowl and 1 zhang high. The flags on the flagpoles were also several feet wide, and there were totems of birds and beasts drawn on them. There were also words such as Bronze Pillar Country and Sioux written on them. These banners fluttered in the wind, and there was a feeling of golden drums being beaten. Along with the dong 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 sounds of drums, there were people wearing battle armor and holding spears on the city wall. They quickly ran along the city wall to change positions, giving people the illusion of war. "Father, our city is so high." A childish voice sounded from Xiao Hua's side. Xiao Hua shifted his gaze away from the city wall, and he saw a 3-year-old child riding on the neck of a burly man, crying out in surprise. "Yes, Nyoer, this is my Bronze Pillar Country's capital. This is also what father told you before, the capital that even under the joint attack of 40,000 soldiers from 3 countries, they still couldn't take it." The burly man said in a loud voice. "Boy knows." The child's clear voice replied, "They besieged our capital for 10 days and 10 nights, but they still couldn't break through the city wall. In the end, our king led a large army back to the capital and used 8,000 soldiers to defeat the enemy, causing them to flee. Look at the marks on the city wall. They were all made by stones in the past. Those rocks are falling like rain. Only the cities and soldiers of my Bronze Pillar Country can withstand such a ferocious attack," the burly man said and looked up at the soldiers running back and forth on the city wall. He said regretfully, "It's a pity that it's war now. Otherwise, father could bring you up to the city wall to take a look." "It's okay, father. Boy will also join the army when he grows up." At that time, boy will personally go up to the city wall to defend. The child said very seriously, Haha, not bad. This is my bronze pillar country's child. I'll be waiting for the day you'll be on guard duty in the capital city. The man laughed heartily as he carried the child toward the city gate that was several feet wide. Hee. Xiao Jian laughed coldly. Bronze pillar country is so militaristic. The capital city is nothing more than this. Thou Master Xiao is right. Louis stood up on the carriage and said with a smile, This kid has been to a few countries' capital cities before. This bronze pillar country city cannot be considered the highest or the biggest. That's right. Although this city is over Tinjiang tall, Xiaohua had seen Tongmu City, Suntian City, and so on. Which one of them is not 10 times bigger than this city? This kind of small mortal city really cannot enter his eyes. However, the mottled marks on the city wall are all made of blood and meat paste, making Xiaohua sigh. As for Yuanya, he probably doesn't care about city walls at all. Xiaojian, this city doesn't have a name? Xiaohua looked at the 3 words, Bronze Pillar Country, above the city gate and unconsciously frowned, reporting to a mortal elder. Xiaojian said with a smile, According to the rules of the hidden immortal continent, the capital city does not have a name, only the country's name. On the contrary, other cities have their own names. Oh, so that means this capital city is originally Bronze Pillar Country? Xiaohua smiled. This custom is really interesting. Yes. Xiao Jian raised his hand and said, The king of the Bronze Pillar Nation lives in this capital. The Bronze Pillar Nation's royal palace is also there, and so are the civil and military officials. As long as the capital city is captured, the Bronze Pillar Nation will fall. It's normal to say that this capital city is the Bronze Pillar Nation. There are rivers all around this capital city. Is this used to protect the city? Xiaohua pointed again and frowned. Is this kind of defense useful? Immortal elders should know that this is called a city moat. Xiao Jin explained, The city moat can separate the city from the enemy's cavalry, heavy infantry, and so on, preventing them from directly facing the enemy. Moreover, there is a lot of river water in this moat. Some of it is poisonous water, some of it is fire water. Wanting to pass through this moat is not easy. This Bronze Pillar Country's moat is relatively wide. Ordinary catapults are unable to get close. Those huge rocks that hit the city walls are also powerless. It is said that in Bronze Pillar Country's moat, there are man-eating fish beasts. That year when the 3 countries besieged the city, thousands of people died in the moat. Actually, Xiaohua hesitated and said, This moat is nothing in this Xiao's eyes. This Xiao remembered that you once said that Bronze Pillar Country was ruled by Confucian cultivators. Confucian cultivators have countless methods. This moat is of limited use, just like the so-called 3 countries besieging the city. As long as someone flies up and attacks, the city will not be destroyed. If he did not even know about the usual festivals, then there would be a problem with Xiaohua's origin. Xiaohua did not want others to have any suspicions. -11. Chapter 32:48. Let's go. We'll enter the city. Xiaohua looked at the setting sun and waved his hand. This large city was the capital of the Bronze Pillar Country, so the interrogation was naturally strict. When the 4 of them arrived at the city gate, they were stopped by the soldiers guarding the gate. The Bronze Pillar Country was founded by Confucian cultivators and did not respect Taoism. Xiao Jian was sweating profusely from the questioning, but fortunately, his official documents were normal and everything in the country of Xi was normal. After spending some money, they successfully entered the city gate. As soon as they entered the city gate, the liveliness in front of them was different from the outside. Outside the city gate, there were only villages, simple and plain like what Xiaohua and the others saw. After entering the city gate, it looked like there were also villages and rivers, but whether it was the people's clothes or temperament, it was different from outside the city. In particular, these villages did not have the same smoke as outside the city. Only a few places had some smoke, but most places did not have any smoke. On the side of the river, there were many children who were excitedly throwing fist-sized lanterns into the water under the guidance of the adults. They wanted to watch the lanterns float down the river. Unfortunately, most of these crudely made lanterns sank to the bottom of the river as soon as they touched the water, causing the children to cry out in pain. These are the manners of the wealthy families in the suburbs of the Bronze Pillar country. Seeing that Xiaohua was looking at the surrounding mountain villages, Xiao Jian said indifferently, they have a large amount of wealth in their hands and want to live a leisurely life in the countryside. However, they cannot truly move out of the city, or even to other towns. They will draw a plot of land at the edge of the capital and live the life they want. After another hour of riding on horseback, the road beneath their feet had been replaced by bluestone slabs. The trees on both sides were neatly arranged, and lanterns were hung on the trees. From afar, they looked like twinkling stars. Looking at the surrounding buildings, they were also tall and big. These magnificent buildings were all famous shops in the capital city. Now, they were all decorated with lanterns and colored banners, and their doors were wide open. Many people strolled on the main road and unconsciously walked in. With so many people, Xiaohua and the others naturally couldn't ride horses. Lu Yi very cleverly took Xiaohua's reins and led the horse behind Yuanya. There was an inn nearby with many people lodging there. However, Xiao Jian only glanced at it once before walking past without stopping at all. Xiaohua thought that it was because there were too many people here. However, after passing by a few more houses, Xiao Jian didn't even look at them. Xiaohua was greatly surprised and asked, Xiao Jian, it's already late. This Xiao doesn't need to rest. You all need to stay here. Aren't you going to find an inn? Hee, immortal. You haven't been in the mortal world for a long time. I'm afraid you don't know. If it were a normal day, we would be willing to stay here. However, today is the Hungry Ghost Festival, a festival for the secular world, and also a sacrifice for our Taoists. Since we are Taoists, we should stay in the Taoist temple and not spend the night outside. Xiao Jian said with a bitter smile. All right. Xiaohua didn't expect that the fallen Taoists still had so many rules. He could only nod his head. However, after seeing so many people, Xiao Jian began to ask around. However, when they saw Xiao Jian's Taoist robe, they hurriedly avoided him as if they saw a fly. They didn't give Xiao Jian a chance to speak. Taoist Xiao, it's better for this little one to go. Louis couldn't bear to watch for a moment and said in a low voice. After hearing Xiao Jian's agreement, Louis handed the reins of the horse to Yuan Ye and disappeared into the crowd. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Louis had already returned. He pointed ahead and said, Taoist Xiao, there's a Shiluo ridge 2 miles ahead. There's a Qiyang temple on it. Immediately after, he walked in front of Xiaohua and respectfully said, Taoist Xiao, this little one has just made some inquiries. It just so happens that there will be an auction tonight at Bright Moon Lane. That place isn't too far from Seven Suns Monastery. However, it's still early. Are you going to Qiyang Temple or Bright Moon Lane? Xiaohua was overjoyed when he heard this and said with a smile, since this Xiao is also a Taoist disciple, I'll go to Qiyang Temple first. It won't be too late to go to Bright Moon Lane after I'm done. Okay, this little one will lead the way. Lu Yi took the reins from Yuan Ye's hands and walked to the front. Just after turning a few streets, Xiaohua's eyes lit up. Between the tall buildings, there was a huge garden. The people around Xiaohua suddenly increased. Not only were there men and women behind Xiaohua, but there were also other streets that connected to the other directions of the garden. There were also more people coming from those places. Okay. A burst of noise came from the crowd in front. Then, a 1-foot-long lotus flower lantern rose from the crowd. The lotus flower lantern looked very exquisite. Whether it was the lotus leaves at the bottom or the flower petals around the lantern cover, they were all very lifelike. Moreover, these flower petals trembled slightly under the light of the lantern, just like a bud that was blooming. However, the lotus flower lantern had just flown a few dozen feet into the air when another voice shouted, Today is the Hungry Ghost Festival. This lotus flower lantern should go with the flow of the water. Although flying in the air is beautiful, it doesn't conform to etiquette. Good. Immediately, there were many busybodies who cheered loudly. Rise. The scholar pointed at the lotus flower lantern, and it immediately flew from his hand. As the lotus flower lantern's light illuminated the surroundings once again, the scholar raised the brush in his hand and began to walk with strange steps. He chanted, Heaven and earth have righteous energy, and all kinds of things are manifold. Below are rivers and mountains, and above are the sun and stars. To people, they are vast and abundant, filling the heavens. The path of the emperor shall be cleared, and he shall spit out the court. Following this impassioned recitation, the scholar's body emitted a scarlet light. At the same time, the light trembled and shone with the scholar's footsteps. Finally, it slowly fell on the scholar's brush, and the scholar's final words were heard. Spit out the cord. With a shout, the scarlet light between the brush and the brush shone brightly. In the instant the brush flashed, the scholar placed the brush on the lotus flower lantern. The light covered the lantern's light, and when the light disappeared, the lantern's light was revealed again. A scarlet, one character appeared on the lotus flower lantern. The one character was like a golden hook, and every stroke was like a sharp sword. An unconcealable sword intent was emitted from this character. Good. The girl couldn't help but clap her hands and cheer. Miss, please keep this lotus flower lantern well. If you miss your loved ones, can you personally place this lantern in the stream? The scholar with the surname Jiang put away the brush and said with a smile, when the gate to heaven and earth opens at midnight, the people you miss will definitely see it and will definitely visit you in your dreams. -11. Chapter 32:49. Hee. Thank you, Mr. Jiang. Seeing the lotus lantern falling from the sky, the girl hurriedly grabbed it and said with a smile, I want to put Mr. Jiang's calligraphy at home to suppress evil. I can't bear to let it flow in the stream. The girl's emotions were clearly very rich, and her expression could be considered naked. However, Mr. Jiang smiled and cupped his hands. No matter what, I hope Miss will have a wonderful Hungry Ghost Festival. Mr. Jiang, Mr. Jiang. For a moment, many men and women shouted, wanting Mr. Jiang to add the finishing touches to their lotus lanterns. Ha ha ha. Thank you for your support. This Jiang is just an ordinary person in the academy. This Jiang has many martial brothers, and their cultivation is not inferior to this Jiang's. Everyone, don't worry. Mr. Jiang laughed and waved his hand. Many lotus lanterns flew out from everyone's hands and landed near the pavilion, not only in front of Mr. Jiang, but also in front of the other students. Xiao Hua and the others were not too close to the pavilion, but when many lotus lanterns flew up, the bright lights still illuminated them. Mr. Jiang's gaze was like lightning, sweeping past the four people. When he saw Xiao Jian's Taoist robe, he unconsciously paused, and a strange expression flashed. However, this expression disappeared in a flash, and his gaze fell on the lotus lanterns again. The three principles are related to fate, and the Tao is the root. Yu 9 yang. Li also insufficient. Chu Chioing crown. Send the carriage to the north. Cauldron sweet is syrup. Seek but cannot obtain. Inside the pavilion, the sonorous and powerful chanting voice came out word by word. Many students waved their ink brushes to add the finishing touches to the lotus lanterns. Xiao Hua and the others walked out from the pavilion. This garden was lively, but this liveliness belonged to the students, to the villagers, and not to them. Other than the pavilion closest to Xiao Hua, from time to time, there were soaring true energy blooming in other places of the garden, and even some gorgeous sword energy. In this kind of noisy night, this kind of righteous night, even if it was the Hungry Ghost Festival, even if it was the night of 100 ghosts, there was no need to be afraid of ghosts approaching, right? After leaving the garden, Xiao Hua and the others walked a few streets under Lu Yi's lead. The surroundings gradually quieted down. Although there were still some hanging lanterns, it was far less noisy than before. Moreover, these few streets already looked dilapidated and even a little desolate. The distance between the streets was getting longer and longer, and there was a river that wasn't particularly wide beside the street. However, the river was filled with stinky water, and the air was filled with a foul stench and a bunch of flies. A small bridge appeared in front of Xiao Hua's horse. Several beggars in ragged clothes were holding dirty basins in their hands as they quickly walked past Xiao Hua's horse. Xiao Hua smiled because he could already see that behind the small bridge, there was a desolate slope. There were a few dilapidated shacks on the left side, and the smelly gutter-like stream on the left side was precisely circling around this desolate slope and the shacks. This must be Shilua Ridge and Seven Suns Monastery, Xiao Hua thought in his heart. However, Just as he was about to speak, he frowned again. With a sweep of his divine sense, he saw two black-clothed people about 100 feet away from him. They were quickly passing through a pile of ruins. They were using qigong to run into the distance. Oh, these people. Could they be the local? Xiao Hua's divine sense only swept a little, but he didn't know why these people had aroused his vigilance. After thinking for a moment, he asked, Louis, is there any organization similar to the Cloak Gang in the Copper Pillar country? There is. Louis replied without hesitation. Black Wind Sect. Oh, isn't this the capital of the Copper Pillar country? How can such evil people exist? Xiao Hua withdrew his divine sense and asked curiously. Without waiting for Louis to speak, Xiao Jin coldly said, Senior Immortal should know that since ancient times, officials and bandits have been one family. Not to mention the borders, they exist in any country's capital. And Xiao Hua nodded slightly and pointed with his finger. Let's go. After crossing this bridge, Seven Suns Monastery will be in front. Clatter, clatter. The monotonous sound of horse hooves echoed in the quiet street. At the side of the lively Copper Pillar Academy, in the garden that Xiao Hua had just walked through, there was a slightly dark place. Teacher Jiang, with sweat on his forehead, was sitting there drinking tea and resting. With a sound of a flying sword, an inch-long flying sword landed in front of Teacher Jiang's eyes. Teacher Jiang frowned and looked left and right. With a clap of his hand, the flying sword turned into a small paper sword and stopped in his hand. When Teacher Jiang opened the paper and saw what was inside, his expression didn't change. A sword light appeared in his hand and shredded the paper. Then, he stood up and said indifferently, 100 Ghosts Parade, 100 Ghosts Parade. Hearing that the Seven Suns Monastery was right in front of him, Xiao Jin patted the horse beneath him. The horse quickened its pace and climbed onto the small bridge that wasn't too tall. At this moment, the full moon in the sky had yet to rise and the small bridge was a little blurry in the night. When Xiao Jin climbed onto the bridge, he realized that the other side of the small bridge was very low-lying. It was a vast expanse of darkness, and there were occasional flickers of light. It was completely different from what he had seen before. Let's go there. Xiao Hua pointed at the left side of the bridge. There was a dim yellow light there, but it wasn't obvious. AI. All the Taoist temples in the world are one family. Xiao Jin sighed. Although the capital of Copper Pillar Nation is prosperous, Seven Suns Monastery and Longevity Town's Jiangchao Monastery are no different. When everyone got close to the dim yellow light, they saw a door blocked by a pile of broken tiles. This door was about 1 zhang wide and 2 zhang tall. However, Xiao Jin lost interest after a glance. There was no other reason, other than the fact that it was several times bigger than the Jiangchao Monastery's door. The entire Seven Suns Monastery's door looked as though someone had moved the entire Jiangchao Monastery's door over. The paint on the door was dry, like the scales of a river fish that had been scraped off. Some fell off, some hung there. Even the door that was open was like the Jiangchao Monastery's door. It was slanted and looked as though it was about to fall off the axle. Of course, on the two sides of the door, there were 2 big red lanterns with holes in them. On the door, although it was very clean, the words Seven Suns Monastery were still blurry. This told Xiao Jin that he wasn't dreaming of Longevity Town. Slow down, slow down. Xiao Jin had just walked to the front of Seven Suns Monastery when he heard an unusually benevolent voice. Although this voice was old and hoarse, it was extremely clear in the night sky and wind. Benevolent Lord, please eat slowly. If it's not enough, there will be more. Xiao Jin looked over in confusion. Right in front of Seven Suns Monastery, there was a big iron pot. Inside the iron pot was steaming hot porridge. In front of the iron pot, there were more than 10 beggars in ragged clothes. There were old and young beggars, and there were even a few women carrying babies on their backs. These beggars, without exception, all had their gazes on the porridge. They licked their dry lips and swallowed their saliva without concealing it. A sickly youth with a face full of stains received a bowl of porridge. He didn't care that the porridge was scalding hot and immediately drank a mouthful. Behind the iron pot, there was a short old man holding a wooden spoon in his hand. He hurriedly said to the youth. Under the light, the old man's smiling expression was as though he was looking at his own anxious grandson. Xiao Hua had already dismounted from his horse and walked behind Xiao Jian. His gaze was different from Xiao Jian's. It didn't land on the porridge, but rather on the old man. This old man was about 60 years old. His back was a little hunched, and he wore a slightly loose Taoist robe. This Taoist robe didn't seem to have any luster under the light. It was obvious that it had long been worn out. The old man's sparse white hair was neatly combed and tied into a small Taoist crown on his head. The old man was very hale and hearty, and he had a sage-like appearance. However, in Xiao Hua's eyes, this old Taoist was no different from an ordinary person. Not only did he not have any magic power, he didn't have any Taoist cultivation. Good people. The old Taoist's gaze moved away from the youth, and he said apologetically, "This porridge has just been cooked. Originally, I wanted to wait for it to cool down before taking it out. However, I was afraid that you would be hungry and wait for a long time, so I hurriedly took it out. Everyone, after serving it, let it cool down a little before eating. Today is the Hungry Ghost Festival. I don't have much food, but I still have this porridge. It will definitely be enough." "Thank you, Taoist," these beggars said weakly. It was obvious that they were really hungry. Some of them had already heard the sound of Xiao Jian's horse hooves and raised their eyes to look at Xiao Jian's group. The old Taoist's ears didn't seem to be working well. He didn't hear the sound of horse hooves and continued to use the spoon to scoop up a spoonful of porridge from the iron pot. His arm was trembling as he poured the porridge into the broken bowl of another beggar who had already stretched out his arm. Oh! When Xiao Jian jumped down from his horse, his figure flashed past the old Taoist's eyes. Only then did the old Taoist realize that someone was approaching. Turning his head, he saw Xiao Jian's Taoist robe. Joy flashed across the old Taoist's eyes as he called out, "Immeasurable Taoist, fellow Taoist is here? I am Xiao Jian. Greetings, senior." Xiao Jian placed a palm in front of his chest and bowed respectfully. "I don't dare. This old Taoist, Dao Shan, is only a few years older than you. I can't be considered a senior." The old Taoist didn't put down the spoon in his hand and returned the greeting with one hand. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, please wait for a moment. Once this old Taoist has given the porridge to these good people, I will invite fellow Taoist into the temple for a chat. Senior Dao Shan, please go ahead first." Xiao Jian looked at the door behind the old Taoist in bewilderment. He didn't understand. This Seven Sons Temple's door was so big. Shouldn't it have some disciples? Could it be that this Dao Shan was even worse off than him? He didn't even have a disciple? The old Taoist naturally saw Xiao Hua and the others behind Xiao Jian. However, seeing that they were all young, he thought that they were Xiao Jian's disciples. He smiled kindly and scooped porridge for the beggars. However, after a short while, the old Taoist's arm trembled even more violently. -11. Chapter 3250. Xiao Jian couldn't help but ask, "Senior, you're already old. Why do you have to do everything yourself? Why don't you just leave these things to your disciple?" "Haha, fellow Taoist Xiao, every bowl of porridge should reflect on the difficulties of Taoism. Every word and action should follow the benevolence of the Taoist ancestor. Meditation is cultivation. Refining energy is cultivation. Giving porridge is cultivation. This old Taoist has given porridge for 50 years. Even though I have one foot in the grave now, I still don't dare to neglect it." Dao Shan rested for a while and said with a smile, "Hiss." Not only was Xiao Jian shocked, even Xiao Hua was greatly shocked. Giving porridge for 50 years. This wasn't something an ordinary person could do. Immediately, Xiao Hua felt that he had lived for 200 years in vain. Although that was what he said, Dao Shan was old after all, and the wooden spoon was big. This old Taoist scooped a few more spoonfuls and couldn't scoop anymore. "Yeah," Xiao Jian shouted. "Where the hell did you go? Hurry up and help your senior get the porridge." "Yes, master," Yuanya answered and came out. However, when Yuanya came out from the shadow behind Xiao Hua, his figure flashed past the porridge, and the group of beggars were all frightened. "Taoist Xiao, let me do it." Louis saw that although Dao Shan didn't frown, there was obviously some worry in his eyes, so he hurriedly jumped down from the carriage. Louis's mouth was sweet, He walked in front of Dao Shan and bowed respectfully. Grandpa Dao, you've been doing good all your life, and this kindness and kindness must be passed down. I, Lu Yi, am not talented, but I'm willing to accept the root of kindness of our Taoism and continue doing good deeds. If Grandpa Dao is still worried, how about you give me some pointers on my cultivation? Okay. Dao Shan looked at Lu Yi's cleverness and his pleasing words. He had to give the spoon to Lu Yi even if he didn't want to. However, Dao Shan was still standing at the side. He watched as Lu Yi filled every beggar's bowl to the brim without any slack. Only then did he feel relieved and turned to Xiao Jian, saying, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, you're so lucky. Your disciple is 100 times better than my disciple." "I don't dare." Xiao Jian hurriedly waved his hand and let Xiao Hua go. He smiled and said, "Lu Yi is senior's servant, not my disciple." "Oh?" Dao Shan was obviously stunned. Looking at Xiao Hua's youthful face, he seemed to have understood something. He hurriedly tidied up his Taoist robe and bowed respectfully. "I, Dao Shan, greet senior." How could Xiao Hua bear to let this benevolent old Taoist bow to him? With a wave of his hand, the old Taoist was unable to bow down. Xiao Hua rushed to bow first and said, "I, Xiao Hua, greet great master Dao Shan." Dao Shan was unable to kneel down, and he knew that Xiao Hua had an extraordinary background. His eyes flashed with surprise, and then he smiled bitterly. "I don't practice Taoism. I only read Taoism scriptures. I'm not good at soliciting alms. I only know how to give alms. I've never practiced Taoism, so how can I be called a master?" "Grandmaster, you're wrong," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "There are countless paths of cultivation, and none of them are smooth. The great master prioritizes kindness. His actions are like a drop of water. For nearly 60 years, he has benefited all living beings. Although I have done good deeds before, if I am as persistent as Grandmaster, I can't. If Grandmaster can't be called a Grandmaster, then who can? If Grandmaster isn't a Grandmaster, then there are no Grandmasters in this hidden, immortal continent." "Senior." Dao Shan was still modest. "I entered Taoism when I was young, and I have always admired people like you who have remarkable Taoism skills. However, I have never had such an opportunity in my life. Therefore, I used such a meager method to do my best for Taoism. This is really not worth mentioning in front of Senior. Senior's words make me ashamed. Call me fellow Taoist," Xiao Hua said with a smile. He really didn't want to be called Senior by such an old man. After all, the old man had reached the end of his life. Although he was old, he was still in his prime. "Yes, fellow Taoist Xiao." Dao Shan was very happy. However, when he spoke, he realized something. "So you two fellow Taoists are from the same family." "Fellow Taoist, you're wrong." Xiao Hua shook his head. "I only met Taoist Xiao by chance. All Taoism in the world is from the same family. Meeting each other is fate," Dao Shan said with a smile. Then, he looked at the many beggars who were slowly rushing over from afar. The smile on his face disappeared. Sigh. This year, Bronze Pillar Nation is expanding its army. The number of beggars in the country is increasing. Goo goo. Xiao Jian's stomach actually started to growl. Although the old Taoist's ears weren't very good, he was really close to Xiao Jian. Xiao Jian's thunderous growl immediately made him understand. "Hee, I am really happy to see fellow Taoist. Sorry for the lack of manners." Dao Shan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, please wait for a moment. I will call my disciples out to welcome you." "Don't." Xiao Hua saw Dao Shan's neat clothes and knew that the old Taoist was very particular about it. He didn't know what kind of etiquette Dao Shan had, so he hurriedly stopped him. However, Dao Shan waved his hand and said, "Confucian cultivators have always been about etiquette. They use etiquette to govern the country. Although Taoism doesn't have too many complicated etiquettes, fellow Taoist came from afar. My Seven Sons Temple has to treat you seriously. If Confucian cultivators were to see this, they would definitely mock my Taoism." Xiao Hua wanted to say more, but Xiao Jian smiled and said, Senior Dao Shan's Seven Sons Temple is a real Taoist temple. If you don't let him welcome Senior in, I'm afraid you will lose face for my Taoism. It won't look good if word gets out." "All right." Xiao Hua was curious. He didn't understand why a Taoist temple needed to welcome him. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the iron pot in front of Seven Suns Temple was already empty. However, there were still many skinny and sallow beggars in front of the iron pot. These beggars saw that the porridge was gone and left in disappointment. However, there were still some who looked at it and stubbornly stayed in front of the iron pot. Taoist, looking at the empty door, Louis said softly, "Are we letting these people leave?" Xiaohua smiled and said, "Let them wait first. Once we enter, we will let Master Dao Shan cook the porridge." "Yes," Louis said softly. Those beggars were all overjoyed and obediently waited there. Just as they were talking, a string of music came from the Seven Suns Temple. Then, a few skinny Taoist children walked out from the door with either a flute, or a shang in their hands. Behind these Taoist children, there was Dao Shan, who led a dozen or so neatly dressed middle-aged and old Taoist priests. Dao Shan, who was walking at the front, was even holding a long, white plank-like thing in his hand. Xiaohua wanted to ask Xiao Jin, but Xiao Jin's face had already turned solemn. He quickly walked to the door of Seven Suns Temple and stood straight with his hands in his Taoist robe. He lowered his head and looked at the ground. Seeing this, Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He quickly walked to Xiao Jin's side and stood still. Seeing Xiaohua come, Xiao Jin hurriedly took half a step back to show the difference. Lu Yi was quick-witted. He hurriedly pulled Yuanya, who was stunned at the side, and stood beside Xiaohua while Xiao Jin was behind him. He let Yuanya stand beside him so that he was facing Xiao Jin. Dao Shan and the others walked in front of Xiaohua. They didn't say anything until the song ended. Only then did they say, "I, Dao Shan of Seven Suns Temple, welcome Senior Xiaohua and fellow Taoist Xiao Jin to my Seven Suns Temple." Following these words, Dao Shan raised the plank and bowed respectfully. "Disciples welcome Senior Xiao." Even though they saw that Xiaohua was very young, many Taoist priests still bowed respectfully. Xiaohua and the others also returned the bow. Although Xiaohua didn't know the specific etiquette, he still raised his hand, and the dozen or so people were lifted up by him. Everyone was shocked. "Senior Xiao, please enter the temple to pay respects to the Taoist ancestor." Dao Shan's expression didn't change. He said word by word and turned around. "Yes, master, please." Xiaohua replied and walked towards Dao Shan. When Xiaohua's figure passed by Dao Shan also walked forward and accompanied Xiaohua into the temple. Seven Suns Temple wasn't small. After entering the temple, they saw a rather large courtyard. There were 2 rows of rooms on the east and west. Opposite them was a very imposing hall. Although these rooms were old, their scale was far from what Tidal River Temple could compare to. In particular, there were 2 side doors on both sides of the hall that led directly to the back of the hall. Thinking of the scene he saw from the small bridge, Xiaohua knew that there was a large place behind the hall even without Dao Shan's introduction. The hall was brightly lit. In addition to a few oil lamps in the hall, there were 3 arm-thick red candles burning brightly on the altar table. In addition to the red candles, there was also an incense burner on the altar table. A few incense sticks rose in spirals from the incense burner. On both sides of the incense burner, there were several plates. On the plates were some rice, noodles, grains, and so on. However, what puzzled Xiaohua was that there was no statue of a Dao ancestor behind the altar table. Instead, there were several levels of shrine platforms. On the shrine platforms, there were small signs with some words written on them. In front of the signs, there were small celadone bowls. "Pay respects to the Dao ancestor." When Xiaohua walked to the center of the hall, Dao Shan shouted loudly. He was full of energy. How was he like a 60-year-old old man? Looking at the empty shrine platform and the signs, Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had already thought about this problem when he was in Dawn Rain Continent. Who was the Dao ancestor? Now that he was in Hidden Immortal Continent, this problem still hadn't been solved. He hadn't even paid respects to the Dao ancestor when he was in Dawn Rain Continent. Let the dead be respected. Xiaohua imitated Xiao Jin and placed his hand inside his Taoist robe. He raised his hand up to his forehead and then slowly bowed. Only when his forehead was at the same level as the altar did he stop. Then he bowed 2 more times, making a total of 3 bows. "Respect to your teacher." When Xiaohua got up, Daoshan shouted again. This time, the 3 bows were a bit higher than the previous 3 bows. Xiaohua paid attention to Xiao Jian's actions and followed step by step. Greetings, fellow Taoist, Daoshan shouted and turned around. He held the board that had already turned yellow in his hand and led his disciple to greet Xiaohua. Xiaohua now understood that this board that had turned yellow was actually carved out of jade. Chapter 32:51. Although he had already greeted Daoshan and the others outside the Seven Suns Temple, Xiaohua still followed the so-called etiquette of the Taoist sect and greeted them again. After the greeting, Daoshan's smile became even wider. He walked to the altar and placed the jade board on it. Then, he picked up 3 incense sticks and said to Xiaohua with a smile, "Senior Xiao, please light the incense for the Taoist ancestor." Okay. Xiaohua took the incense sticks and waved his hand. A flame flashed and the 3 incense sticks were immediately lit. A strange expression appeared in the eyes of the dozens of disciples who saw this. After Xiaohua respectfully placed the incense sticks on the incense burner, Daoshan was obviously relieved. He raised his hand and said, "Thank you, Senior Xiao. Please come to the side hall for tea." As he spoke, the Taoist children holding the flute and other musical instruments started playing again. Under Daoshan's lead, Xiaohua walked past a yellow curtain and arrived at the side hall. There was a yellow praying mat and a few tables and chairs here. However, Daoshan didn't sit down immediately when he walked to the chair. Instead, he closed his eyes slightly. This made Xiaohua confused. He looked at Xiao Jian and was also confused. However, the 2 of them could only do as they were told. When the music floated into the night sky, Daoshan opened his eyes and raised his hand with a smile. "Senior, fellow Taoist, please sit." "Fellow Taoist, please." Xiaohua smiled and sat down. After that, Xiao Jian and Daoshan also sat down. Lu Yi and Yuanya obediently stood behind the 2 of them. A Taoist child with delicate features hurriedly came over with a tray that had some paint chipped off. He brought over 3 cups of green tea. When the Taoist child went down, he seemed to have something to say. However, when he saw that Daoshan's attention was on Xiaohua, he didn't dare to speak. He waved his hand at a slightly older disciple behind Daoshan and went down. That older disciple glanced at Daoshan, who was talking to Xiaohua, and nodded slightly at Xiaohua. Then, he quietly walked out. Daoshan's ears weren't very good, so he naturally didn't notice. "Senior Xiao, where do you cultivate? How many disciples do you have?" Daoshan asked respectfully after inviting Xiaohua to drink a mouthful of tea. Xiaohua drank a mouthful of tea. This tea was very bitter and astringent, making the tea somewhat black. Xiaohua only touched his lips and felt relieved. He replied with a smile, "I'll let Grandmaster know. This Xiao used to cultivate overseas, so I don't have any disciples. This Lu Yi is just a servant." "Overseas?" Daoshan's eyes lit up. He said anxiously, "Is it the Eastern Sea? When I was young, I wanted to go to the East Sea to take a look, but until now, I still haven't had the chance to see the magnificent East Sea." Xiaohua smiled and shook his head. "Don't ask too much about which overseas master. In short, it's very far. Of course, if you want to go, you can find some time to go and take a look." "Sigh, I am old. I can't walk anymore," Daoshan said with a smile. Although it sounded like a sigh, there wasn't much sadness in his tone. Xiaohua comforted, "Grandmaster is wrong. Grandmaster's good deeds are clear. The heavenly Tao is naturally fair. It definitely won't let Grandmaster give up at such a young age. There are too few people like Grandmaster in this world. Since Grandmaster has met me, it's an opportunity given to Grandmaster by Dao Zhu. Grandmaster will continue to do good deeds in the Seven Suns Temple in the future." Thank you, Senior, for your auspicious words." Daoshan knew that Xiaohua was a cultivator, but he didn't dare to believe what Xiaohua said. He only smiled and said, Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry to take out the rejuvenation pill. After all, Daoshan was an ordinary person. Xiaohua didn't know if Daoshan could withstand the effects of the rejuvenation pill. Since he came to the Seven Suns Temple, he naturally wanted to help this kind person from the Tao sect to live a long life. Rumble. Xiao Jian was already hungry. Now that he drank a few mouthfuls of tea, he became even hungrier. Haha, I forgot. Dao Shan laughed. He turned his head and ordered, "Disciple, go and get a bowl of porridge for Martial Uncle Xiao." A disciple behind Dao Shan had a difficult expression. However, he still responded and prepared to leave. At this moment, the disciple who just walked out returned to the entrance of the main hall. When he heard Dao Shan's order, he hurriedly walked to Dao Shan's side and whispered a few words. "Oh?" Dao Shan frowned, and a trace of awkwardness appeared on his face. He then smiled and said to Xiao Jian, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, you must be joking. I have already finished the porridge. Moreover, today is the Hungry Ghost Festival. This old Taoist wants to let the benevolent masters around me eat more. So I cooked all the food in the temple into plain porridge. Now that there is no food in the temple, this old Taoist will ask my disciples to pick some vegetables from the backyard. Fellow Taoist, you can cook some. Tomorrow morning, this old Taoist disciples will sell the vegetables in the market and buy some food." Xiao Hua, who was at the side, heard everything clearly. He smiled and said, "Master, you don't have to be so polite. There is no need to persuade the kind people outside to leave. Previously, you were the one who gave the porridge. Now, it is time for me to give the porridge. Master, please let your disciples send me to the place where we store the food." "Oh, Senior Xiao, this is..." Dao Shan didn't understand. Obviously, he didn't understand the Dao sect spells. Senior, Immortal Xiao is a famous cultivator in our Dao sect. He has the ability to transform beings into soldiers and move mountains and seas. You only need to bring Immortal Xiao there," Xiao Jian said with a smile. Dao Shan naturally wouldn't let his disciple bring Xiao Hua there. He personally brought Xiao Hua to the main hall and walked through a few deserted courtyards. Finally, they arrived in front of a small courtyard. Xiao Hua glanced at the wooden door on the left side of the courtyard. Outside the door, under the moonlight, there were a lot of vegetables. In this courtyard, there were two Taoists with strong hands and feet. They were washing the iron pot that they just brought back from outside the temple. Inside here, Dao Shan raised his hand and was about to speak. Xiao Hua shook his head and said, "This place is too small. Is there a bigger place?" Dao Shan was helpless. He pointed to a few houses opposite the courtyard and said, "This is where the winter vegetables are stored. It is empty now. Senior, do you really have a spell that can make something out of nothing?" Seeing is believing. Hearing is false. Xiao Hua strode to the front of the few houses. He waved his hand a few times and said with a smile, "Master, take a look for yourself." "Oh?" Dao Shan held a lantern in his hand as he walked shakily to the front of a house. Looking at the tightly packed food inside, tears almost flowed out of his eyes. Shanzai, Shanzai, this winter, my 7 sons' monastery will not starve to death again." Sweat. Xiao Hua couldn't help but sigh. It is only summer and old Taoist Dao Shan is already thinking of giving out porridge in winter. It seems like this kindness has already penetrated deep into old Taoist's bone marrow. "Quick, disciples, let's cook some porridge and invite Senior Xiao to eat. Hurry up and cook the porridge with the iron pot. Let benevolent master outside the temple eat his fill." Dao Shan hurriedly instructed. Dao Shan's disciples all went crazy. They looked at the few houses again and again. After confirming that the food inside was piled up like a mountain, they carefully took some of it to the opposite courtyard and let the Taoist cook it. Everyone looked at Xiao Hua with reverence and respect. This was no different from the immortal Xiao Hua in their hearts. "AI, Senior Xiao indeed has divine skills." Dao Shan accompanied Xiao Hua back to the side hall. He said emotionally, "This is something that Junior would never have dreamed of." "What divine skills?" Xiao Hua waved his hand. "It's just that this Xiao has a chinkuan pouch and carries some food with me." Dao Shan really didn't know what a chinkuan pouch was. He only understood after Xiao Jian explained it to him. "Wait till tomorrow. This Xiao will let you see what a true divine skill is." Xiao Hua pretended to be mysterious and said, "Okay, Junior will wait and see." Dao Shan didn't know what Xiao Hua wanted to do. He only smiled and agreed. Xiao Hua looked at the main hall and asked again, "This Xiao remembers that there should be a golden body in the Taoist temple. Why isn't our Taoist ancestor here?" "AI, I'll let Senior know." When this matter was mentioned, Dao Shan's face revealed a worried expression. Tongzhou country was founded by Confucian cultivators and has always rejected our Taoist sect. This Shilua Ridge originally didn't have any Taoist temples. 100 years ago, it was just a barren slope. All the dirty things in the country were discarded here. Later on, this Taoist ancestor came here and used silver to buy this barren slope. He then built the Qiang temple here. Later on, the king asked about this matter and wanted to demolish the Qiang temple. The Taoist ancestor led a few disciples and went on a hunger strike for 10 days straight. Seeing that our Taoist disciples were determined to keep the Taoist temple, the king was touched and agreed not to demolish the Qiang temple. However, he also didn't allow any golden bodies to be erected in the temple. Thus, the Taoist ancestor placed the spirit tablets of the previous generations of seniors here to worship. He didn't want to erect any golden bodies. Believe in your heart. If you don't believe in it, even if you reconstruct a golden body, it will only be a wedding dress for others. Xiaohua didn't speak. Instead, Xiao Jian spoke with sorrow. That's right. If you believe in it, there will be a golden body of the Taoist ancestor everywhere. Dao Shan nodded. Later on, Master and this Taoist ancestor knew that the king didn't like Taoist sect. Thus, we kept a low profile and only did good deeds. Everything in the temple was personally built by this Taoist ancestor and his disciples. There is almost no charity in Tongzhou country. At this point, Dao Shan sighed again. Even so, the Seven Sons Temple is still a little difficult. Originally, no one paid attention to this barren slope. However, now that there are more people than land in the country and this place isn't far from the palace, many people's gazes fell on the Seven Sons Temple again. If not for the recent war between Tongzhou country and Jiang country, this Taoist ancestor wouldn't be so free here. As he spoke, a Taoist child served a few bowls of plain porridge. Xiaohua naturally didn't need it. Instead, Yuan Ye and Lu Yi accompanied Xiao Jian to drink a few bowls. Out of Xiaohua's expectations, Dao Shan also drank a bowl. So this Taoist ancestor who gave the porridge didn't eat his fill at night. After everyone finished eating, Xiaohua glanced at Lu Yi and turned to Dao Shan. Fellow Taoist, this Xiao will be staying at the Seven Sons Temple tonight. However, this Xiao still has some matters to attend to at Bright Moon Lane. Fellow Taoist, please rest first. This Xiao will pay you a visit tomorrow morning. Bright Moon Lane? Dao Shan heard and frowned. He hesitated for a moment and asked curiously, Senior, why are you going there? We are outsiders. We shouldn't go there. -11. Chapter 3252. Oh. Xiaohua did not understand. He smiled and asked, I have some primeval stones here and want to go there to do some transactions. Also, I heard that there is an auction there tonight. I want to go there to take a look. I wonder, what is wrong with that? If that is the case, then I can be at ease. Dao Shan understood and nodded. He pointed with his finger and said, Fellow Taoist, don't be anxious. I will call my disciples over and let them go over. There is no need. Xiaohua had already scanned the area with his divine sense. Other than a few Taoists who were swallowing their saliva behind Dao Shan, the rest of the Taoists were gathered in the courtyard, wolfing down the porridge. He finally understood why Dao Shan wanted to personally guard the beggars outside Seven Sons Temple. Thus, Xiaohua hurriedly waved his hand and said, Louis has already found out the location of Bright Moon Lane. I actually knew it with one look. Fellow Taoists need not worry. All right, how could Dao Shan not know what his disciple was like? He stood up and said, I will send Senior out. Ha, fellow Taoist, just let your disciples watch over my horses. Xiaohua waved his hand and quickly walked out with Lu Yi. As for Xiao Jian, he was slightly stunned but still hurriedly followed behind. Although he did not have any primeval stones, he still wanted to go to Bright Moon Lane to watch the show. This Seven Sons Temple made him feel like he was looking at something that hurt people. When Xiaohua stepped out of Seven Sons Temple, he was slightly shocked and felt a little uncomfortable. When he was about to release his divine sense, the beggars who were giving out porridge and eating porridge in front of the door all looked at him. The few people who were waiting earlier hurriedly shouted, Thank you, immortal elder, for the porridge. It seemed like the disciples of Seven Suns Temple had already shown off Xiao Hua's immortal method of conjuring food to these beggars. Hee, no need to thank me, no need to thank me. This is all due to Master Dao Shan's mercy, Xiao Hua said, and hurriedly brought Lu Yi and the rest out of Seven Suns Temple. After walking far away, Xiao Hua released his divine sense again and carefully observed Seven Suns Temple. He did not find anything wrong and could not help but feel strange. Strange, is this vigilance? It doesn't seem like it. What kind of sudden impulse? Over the past 100 years, the primordial spirit that Xiao Hua had split into the hand of karma had been comprehending the divination technique given by Juxia. Although this primordial spirit had fused with the hand of karma and had an innate advantage over ordinary cultivators comprehending this divine technique, the divination technique was too profound after all. There was not much difference between 100 years and 10 years. Xiao Hua did not make any special progress in his cultivation. Just like the primordial spirit that had merged with the heavenly Tao and had now turned into a real star, although it had changed from formless to corporeal, and even had the profound mysteries of the origin of Earth, Xiao Hua still couldn't obtain too much from the heavenly Tao. Just like the mountain peak in front of him that pierced the sky, Xiao Hua was looking for a path to climb from the bottom of the mountain. Now, he had found it and was climbing, but this mountain was really too big. After climbing for a day, a year, or even 100 years, compared to the entire mountain peak, it was almost the same. Therefore, although Xiao Hua's heart seemed to have been hit by a sudden impulse, he still didn't understand what it was, nor did he know whether this feeling was good or bad. Could it be that there's something strange about Bright Moon Lane? Xiao Hua frowned slightly. Looking at Lu Yi, Yuanya, and Xiao Jin who were following close behind him, he pondered, how about not letting them go to Bright Moon Lane? I'll go and take a look myself. But looking at Lu Yi and the others' excited expressions, as if they were also looking forward to the auction, Xiao Hua gave up on the idea. Bright Moon Lane was indeed not far, and they reached it in less than an hour. When he saw the liveliness of Bright Moon Lane, Xiao Hua finally understood Dao Shan's astonishment. It was also on the side of a stream, and this stream was 10 times the size of the one in Seven Suns Monastery. The water of this stream was clear and gurgling. Lotus lanterns were hung on the willows by the shore, and the stream reflected the light of the lanterns. What was special was that there were many different kinds of pleasure boats on the stream. Some had canopies, some didn't, and all of them were hung with lotus lanterns, leisurely drifting on the stream. Not to mention the dancers on the pleasure boats playing the pipa, not to mention the women playing the zither outside the pleasure boats, not to mention the white-robed scholar standing at the bow of the pleasure boats reciting poetry. Just these pleasure boats and lanterns were a beautiful scene that was completely different from the desolate Seven Suns Monastery. Similarly, there was a small bridge that spanned across the stream. Xiao Hua and the others walked to the head of the bridge and saw a small boat that looked like a fallen leaf flowing under the bridge. They heard the sound of a zither that was even more tinkling than the flowing water, and then smelled the thick fragrance of cosmetics mixed with the faint fragrance of the night sky. The cosmetics came from the dancers who lived in the night, and the fragrance came from the blooming flowers among the green leaves that flowed like a stream. Many of them sighed with emotion. They were all living the same life, but some chose to be drunk, some chose to be pure, some endured starvation for the sake of beggars, and some spent a fortune for the sake of a beauty smile. However, what made them sigh with emotion was not only that. When they stood at the head of the bridge, there was a huge archway in front of them. It was at least 10 feet tall, and this archway was extremely luxurious. Although they couldn't see clearly what material it was made of in the night, just by looking at the archway itself, they could see that it didn't have any lanterns. Instead, it emitted a faint light under the surrounding lanterns, and this light emitted different colors from different parts of the archway. Even the 3 large words, Bright Moon Lane, on the archway was simply a rainbow color. This rainbow color was different from the usual brilliance of magic treasures that Xiao Hua had seen before. This rainbow color had a kind of domineering, a kind of dazzling feeling, and gave people an indescribable impulse when they saw it. Behind this archway, there was a narrow street that was several feet wide. On both sides of the street were 3-story buildings, and all of them were brightly lit, with the sounds of orioles and swallows dancing. Moreover, looking further, there were several crisscrossing streets and countless rows of small buildings. Not to mention the incomparable ostentatiousness of this bright moon lane in the night sky. Even the lights of the bright moon lane that were comparable to the natural bright moon reflected in the night sky only made this corner of the Copper Pillar country a nightless place. Xiao Hua and the others stood quietly at the head of the bridge. The spacious bridge was once again filled with people weaving together. Some were walking out of the bright moon lane with drunken smiles, some were hugging beauties, and even more were like Xiao Hua and the others, entering the bright moon lane from the side of the river. In their eyes, they didn't care about the outer appearance of the bright moon lane. They only cared about the inner meaning of the bright moon lane. Let's go and take a look. Xiao Hua used his divine sense to scan the place. There were quite a few places that were unbearable, but Xiao Hua was too lazy to continue looking. After giving an order, he walked down from the bridge. Io, these Taoist masters? How about coming to our top floor to take a look? Just as they walked down from the bridge, a woman with heavy makeup who had been staring at them for a long time already pounced over. She wanted to grab Xiao Hua, who was in front of her, and opened her mouth wide with a smile. The girls in our building love handsome men the most. With a glance, I can tell that this Taoist master and the others are not ordinary. They will definitely be considerate to you. Xiao Hua's face didn't have any expression, as if he didn't see or hear anything. His gaze was very clear as he looked forward. As for the hand that the woman used to grab Xiao Hua's sleeve, she simply couldn't touch Xiao Hua's Taoist robe. A seemingly invisible barrier separated the two, as if the two were not in the same world. This Taoist master, that woman couldn't grab Xiao Hua, so she didn't hesitate at all. She stretched out her hand to grab Xiao Jian, and said respectfully, "Your appearance is comparable to Pan An's. You are the one that my family's girls love. Come, come, come. This servant will introduce you to the number 1 courtesan of the Bright Moon Lane." Xiao Jian, who usually looked a bit wretched, coldly looked at that woman. He touched his chest and said coldly, "This Taoist master only has 2 copper coins here. Can the big sister of the top floor see this Taoist master?" Xiao Jian's voice wasn't soft, and the smile on that woman's face slightly stiffened. She immediately threw him a coquettish glance and said with a very charming smile, "This Taoist master is joking with this servant. There are more than 1 Taoist masters and Buddhist masters who come to my top floor. You unworldly experts are the most generous. Last month, there was even a Buddhist master who redeemed the top floor's girl named Cheng Mimi. How is it possible that you only have 2 big coins? Girl, have you ever seen a brothel without a purse?" Xiao Jian looked at that woman with contempt and patted his own waist. Hee, this Taoist master is actually joking with this servant. That woman's expression didn't change. She threw him a coquettish glance and twisted her slightly fat waist. "I'm ignoring you." As she spoke, she very naturally left Lu Yi and Yuanya and went to welcome the young master in embroidered clothes who came after her. "Brother Taoist, pale-faced young master, dearest Grandpa Taoist." A series of coquettish complaints made Xiao Hua feel disgusted. He had no choice but to close his ears and calmly walk past the many women. Of course, other than those women who ran out to attract customers, the women in the other pavilions in the depths of Bright Moon Lane didn't seem to be outdone. Even though they saw that Xiao Hua and the others didn't even look at the sides, they still called out, hoping that Xiao Hua and the others would stop walking. "Louis!" Xiao Hua had no choice but to raise his voice and say, "Quickly go and find out where the auction is." "Yes, this servant will go right now." Lu Yi's mouth was also dry. Hearing Xiao Hua's order, he hurriedly ran out from the back. Sigh, no wonder Master Dao Shan was so surprised. Xiao Hua simply stopped walking and turned to look at Xiao Jian. "This place is indeed not a place that we can come to. Senior must be joking." Xiao Jian said indifferently, "This junior thinks that Bright Moon Lane is no different from Seven Suns Temple. Senior Dao Shan is living here, and these women are also living here. You can't deny the hardships of these women just because of Senior Dao Shan's kindness. Actually, their situation is also very pitiful. Their situation is 10,000 times more sorrowful than Senior Dao Shan's." "Oh?" Xiao Hua stared blankly. He looked at Xiao Jian with interest and asked curiously, "What do you mean?" Xiao Jian's current life and experience seemed to be similar to the women in the brothel. He wore a light veil and was hard to understand. His words made Xiaohua even more puzzled. -11. Chapter 32:53. Senior Dao Shan is free. He is doing what he likes. Although he is poor, he is willing and never tired of it. It can be said that Senior Dao Shan's life is the result of his desire for benevolence. It is also a kind of cultivation for him. Xiao Jian is not afraid at all and says with great vicissitudes of life, and these women, although they seem to be living a luxurious life, these flashy clothes are unable to cover the tears behind their backs. Senior, do you think they are willing? A pair of jade arms for 1,000 people to sleep on, 2 red lips for 10,000 guests to taste. This kind of life is not something that everyone here can endure. But they have no choice. They have no freedom. They have no choice but to live this kind of life. They have no choice but to give themselves a chance to live. Senior, look behind you. That stream is filled with pleasure boats. Although it is 100 times more beautiful than the stream in Seven Suns Monastery and smells 10,000 times more fragrant, but Junior can say with certainty that there are more bones buried in this stream than in Seven Suns Monastery's stinky river. Those women who are unable to endure the loneliness, unable to endure this birdcage-like life, unable to see their own hope, unable to see a trace of sunshine that belongs to them. Most of them would choose to bury their past in this seemingly clear stream. Senior, they are actually the most pitiful worms. Xiao Jian sighs. Compared to them, Senior Dao Shan is living in an immortal palace. Hee. Xiaohua laughs and looks at this Taoist who has countless stories and says, rather than choosing to be buried here, why not wash away all the dirt? They have the courage to leave this world. Why don't they have the courage to leave Bright Moon Lane? Rather than saying that they are pitiful, it is more like they chose to be pitiful and chose to escape. The heavens have always been merciful and always leave a way out for people. If they don't find the right way out, what can others do? Senior, leaving this luxury and going from complicated to simple. Is this something that ordinary people can do? Xiao Jian knows that Xiaohua does not understand and says again, in this Bright Moon Lane, it is extremely difficult to regain one's freedom. Death is much easier than freedom. Perhaps. Xiaohua had lived for so many years, but he really didn't understand the inner workings of the brothel. Naturally, he didn't understand what Xiao Jian was saying, but he still chose to believe. Being a person, no matter where, is extremely difficult. Taoist priest. Louis ran over from afar, his face covered in makeup. Afraid that he had been taken advantage of by others, he shouted, I've already found out that the auction will be held at Zhai Xinglu Taoist priest. Please follow me there. Zhai Xinglu? Haha, what a big tone. Xiaohua smiled and waved his hand. Lead the way. This Xiao wants to see what kind of grandeur this Zhai Xinglu has. However, the style of the secular world naturally could not compare to the style of a cultivator. Although there was a tall pavilion that stood out from the rest of the 3-story pavilions in Bright Moon Lane, the pavilion was also decorated with flying dragons and flying phoenixes. Xiaohua did not know which calligraphy master had written the words Star Plucking Pavilion on the signboard, but when he looked at it, he could not help but feel disappointed. It's only a... Xiaohua looked at the brightly lit Zhai Xinglu and said indifferently, Immortal Elder. Xiao Jian looked at Zhai Xinglu and seemed to think of something. He frowned and hurriedly said in a low voice, This junior seems to have some impression. This Zhai Xinglu's origin is somewhat unusual. Oh, what's unusual about it? This junior remembers that there seems to be a Zhai Xinglu in the state of Danliang. Xiao Jian said in a low voice, Of course, this matter is too small for this junior to remember clearly. Back then, there seemed to be some alliance that wanted to build this Zhai Xinglu in the state of Danliang. This junior only took a look. As for whether it was built or not, this junior has already forgotten. If it's in the state of Danliang, the state of Bronze Pillar also has it. Maybe the state of Shi and the state of Jiasa also have it. This Xiao understands. Xiaohua snorted. Who cares about its origin? This Xiao is only here to trade. I don't intend to tear down this Zhai Xinglu. Why won't they let this Xiao in? Moreover, Since this Zhai Xinglu is able to sell vitality stones, there must be someone supporting it. Without any origin. How is it possible? Yes, this junior is only reminding senior. Xiao Jian said with a smile. Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and looked at Xiao Jian with a smile that didn't look like a smile. If you didn't lose those vitality stones to the escorts, any one of them could be exchanged for a lot of money here. Not only would it allow Master Dao Shan to give out porridge with peace of mind, but it would also allow the girl who you said had a tragic life with no freedom to be redeemed from the brothel. Don't you think it's a pity? Now that I think about it, it is indeed a pity. Xiao Jian didn't hide it and said in a low voice, however, those vitality stones belong to this junior. Whatever this junior does is this junior's freedom. If this junior loses the freedom to choose because of the freedom of those girls, this junior would rather not have such an opportunity. Xiao Hua nodded and didn't want to say anything more. There was a small empty space behind the signboard of Zhai Xinglu. At this time, there were some car doors parked there. There were also some handsome youths dressed in green who were waiting behind the balcony. Seeing Xiao Hua and the others standing at the door, they first chatted for a while before walking in. How could they not know that these were Taoist priests who were participating in the auction? There were already 2 youths dressed in green who had smiles on their faces and quickly walked up to welcome them. However, before they could open their mouths and before Xiao Hua and the others could get close to the balcony, a hissing sound like a dragon's roar came from the left side of Xiao Hua and the others. It was the opposite side of where Xiao Hua and the others came from. Oh? Not only were the youths in green shocked, even Xiao Hua was stunned. Everyone looked at the source of the dragon's roar in unison and felt even more bewildered. This copper pillar country, where did the dragon come from? In the night sky, for pure white heavenly horses stepped on faint white clouds as if they were descending from the sky. Their bodies flashed with white light as if they were tearing apart the night sky and flying out from the depths of the darkness. Its white mane, which was more than a foot long, swayed with the night wind like a dreamy mist. Its 4 hooves fluttered in the wind, its head proudly raised to the sky, and its galloping free and easy like a swimming dragon. It really made people wonder if this was a dream encounter. Not only that, behind the 4 heavenly horses, there was a carriage cast from gold. This carriage was also floating in the air. The carriage was 1 zhang in size, and there were exquisite patterns on it. Some of these patterns were flowers, some were grass, and some were birds and people. In the center of the 2 sides of the carriage, there were 2 large jade lotus flowers. These jade lotus flowers almost filled up the 2 doors of the carriage. As for the one standing on the carriage and driving the 4 heavenly horses, it was a strong man dressed in golden armor. Dragon horse. Xiao Jian, who was beside Xiao Hua, couldn't help but exclaim, This world really has such a precious horse? The golden carriage pulled by the dragon horse was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it rushed to the front of Zhai Xinglu and arrived in front of Xiao Hua and the others. The dragon horse was about to crash into Xiao Hua, but Xiao Hua didn't seem to have any intention of moving out of the way. Taoist. At this moment, the youths in green came to their senses and hurriedly shouted. Hiss! Another 4 dragon-like horse cries sounded at the same time. The sound shook the night sky. The 4 dragon horses stopped abruptly, just a foot away from Xiao Hua. Do you want to die? The strong man dressed in golden armor was furious. With a wave of his hand, a whip flashed and lashed towards Xiao Hua. The strong man was 1 zhang tall and stood on the carriage. The whip actually made a faint whimpering sound in the air, as if it was going to cut off the air. Not good. Several youths in green panicked and cried out in their hearts. They saw the jade lotus on the carriage and already knew who was coming. But they knew that they couldn't stop this whip, so no one dared to speak. A few of the kind-hearted youths had already closed their eyes. They knew that even if it was a stone lion, it would probably be smashed into smithereens by this whip. This seemingly thin and weak young Taoist would probably be smashed into minced meat. Pa! A crisp sound, followed by a sneer. You can come down. Then, there was another woo sound, followed by a pong sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. The entire area in front of Zhai Xinglu was deathly silent. This is. The timid youth in green hastily opened his eyes. He looked with some disbelief at the strong man who was also standing on the ground in a daze. The bold youth saw clearly that in the blink of an eye, Xiao Hua, who was standing calmly in front of the dragon horse, had grabbed the whip. Then, Xiao Hua gave a casual tug, and the brawny man in golden armor was immediately sent flying from the carriage. Without any resistance, he landed on the ground in front of Zhai Xinglu. "How dare you?" A cold voice came from the golden carriage. Hiss! The 4 dragon horses stretched out their necks and neighed at the same time. They opened their mouths and bit towards Xiao Hua like real dragons. "Humph!" Xiao Hua sneered. His figure rushed towards the center of the dragon horses like a ghost. He very cleverly landed between the 2 dragon horses in the middle. Then, he spread his arms and patted the backs of the 2 dragon horses like a great pung spreading its wings. Oh! The 2 dragon horses let out a mournful cry. Their entire bodies fell with Xiao Hua. When their 4 hooves landed on the ground, they trembled violently, as if they were about to kneel down at any time. "Damned little Taoist!" Along with this cold voice, the door of the golden carriage opened. A young Confucian scholar walked out, holding a folding fan in his hand. His face was filled with shame and anger, and his eyes seemed to be full of spirit, but there was a trace of ruthlessness in them. "Io, young Master Duanmu, you've finally come." Just as this young Confucian scholar was about to walk towards Xiao Hua, an extremely loud and clear voice came from below the signboard of Zhai Xinglu. Then, a similarly dressed middle-aged Confucian scholar quickly walked over. His face carried a smile like a spring breeze. -11. Chapter 32:54. When the young master named Duanmu saw this person, he had no choice but to stop and hide the anger on his face. He cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Brother Zhu. I merely came to take a look. How could I dare to trouble you to welcome me? Young Master Duanmu is an honored guest of Zhai Xinglu. When I heard the neigh of the dragon horses, I knew that young Master Duanmu's golden carriage had arrived. In this world, who else but young Master Duanmu could have dragon horses? Who else could sit in a golden carriage?" Brother Zhu chuckled and appeared to be flattering, but his words were laced with an indiscernible flattery. "Since young Master Duanmu has arrived, how could I not welcome you?" "Hee, I thank Brother Zhu." The ruthlessness in young Master Duanmu's eyes disappeared, and he said with a smile, "I was originally a bit angry, but with Brother Zhu's arrival, my anger was blown away faster than the wind. I don't know where it went." "Haha, many thanks, young Master Duanmu." Scholar Zhu glanced at Xiao Hua and said with a smile, "Unhappiness exists everywhere in this world. However, since everyone is a guest of Zhai Xinglu, this happiness naturally has to be extinguished. Don't you think so, fellow immortal?" Xiao Hua had already retracted his hand when he came out. He slowly walked out from the group of dragon horses. Those dragon horses were obviously afraid of Xiao Hua. They actually retreated a few steps. Although they were still as unruly as before, there was a trace of fear in their eyes that understood human nature. When Xiao Hua heard Scholar Zhu's words, he cupped his hands with a smile and said, "Fellow immortal Zhu is right. There is no such thing as happiness or unhappiness in this world. It's only a matter of whether someone brings it upon themselves. I only came to Zhai Xinglu to broaden my horizons. I won't bring unhappiness upon myself." Haha, fellow immortal is right. As expected of an otherworldly expert, this one is convinced. Scholar Zhu hastily laughed when he saw young Master Duanmu become unhappy after hearing some of his words. He pulled on young Master Duanmu's sleeve and said, "Let's go. I'll take young Master Duanmu away from this unhappy place." "Taoist Master, please." Seeing that Xiao Hua wasn't stingy with young Master Duanmu, several youths in green clothes hastily and respectfully welcomed him. Although their smiles were similar to before, the fear in their eyes was no longer fake. Lead the way." Xiao Hua waved his hand indifferently and glanced at the golden whip that he had just thrown on the ground. The fist-thick whip was curled up like a venomous snake, not moving at all. On the other end of the whip, The burly man in golden armor was standing there in a daze, not moving at all. Just like the whip, he had lost all of his spirit and energy. After Xiaohua followed the green-clothed youth into Zhaixing Lu, the burly man laughed coldly. He took off the golden helmet that covered his face, revealing a vicious expression. Then, with a grab, the golden whip landed in his hand. With a casual wave, it streaked across the air like an awakened python and wrapped around Huang Jinjia's waist. "Come here." The burly man beckoned to a young man in green who was waiting for him. Yes, the youth in green hurried over and bowed. "Master, please drive the carriage and follow me into Zhaixing Lu. There's no hurry. It's not like I don't know how to get in." The burly man reached into his chest and took out a jade-eye ring. He handed it to the young man and whispered a few words to him. His voice was so low that only the youth could hear it. Seeing the hesitation on the youth's face, the burly man said coldly, "If you don't go, I'll get someone else to go. Don't blame me for not giving face to Zhaixing Lu." "Yes, I know." The youth clenched his teeth and nodded. "I'll go now." "Good, that's a good boy. I'll dote on you too." The burly man reached out and patted the youth's shoulder. The youth trembled and almost fell to the ground, not sure if it was because the burly man was too strong, or if the burly man's words were too powerful. Walking past the huge shadow of Zhaixing Lu's signboard, Xiaojian was worried and said softly, "Senior, you were a little impulsive just now." "Oh?" Xiaohua smiled and said curiously, "Fellow Taoist Xiao is considered experienced and knowledgeable. You can't be so petty, right? You even approved the construction of Zhaixing Lu back then. You were also the ruler of a country." A bitter smile appeared on Xiao Jian's face as he said, "Times have changed. I'm now a Taoist priest in dire straits. I don't dare to mention my past bravery. Moreover, this Zhaixing Lu is different from Duanmu family. I don't know about Zhaixing Lu's background, but Duanmu family's background. Senior isn't afraid?" "Duanmu family?" Xiaohua's eyes turned as he had a bad feeling in his heart. He said softly, "Is this family very powerful? Senior really doesn't know? Didn't you see the 2 jade lotuses on the golden carriage? That's the symbol of Duanmu family. Only the direct descendants of Duanmu family have the right to use this symbol." This time it was Xiao Jian's turn to be shocked. Although this Duanmu family isn't the #1 scholarly family in Hidden Immortal Continent, but it's still at the forefront of the first class. It can almost be compared to the first-class families. Not to mention that you and I are unable to contend against them in our current situation. Even if we use the power of a country, it would still be hard to match them. "Oh, Senior, please don't blame Junior for being straightforward. Junior can't see through your cultivation, but even if you've reached the 6th or 7th grade of elemental energy, you still wouldn't be a match for Duanmu family." "Oh." Xiaohua was even more puzzled. If the family's power is so huge, then what about the scholarly sects? Like country Shi's Chongyan sect? How many classes are the families divided into? What are the first class? What are the second class? "My lord." Xiao Jian, who was at the side, was completely dizzy. He stole a glance to the left and right. There weren't many people who came to Zhaixing Lu. At this moment, there were only a few carriages in this empty space. The youth in green was leading the way in front, so Xiao Jian lowered his voice and said, "Senior, you've really been cultivating overseas all this time. But even overseas, Hidden Immortal Continent's 4 major families, Dongfang, Shimin, Nangong, and Baiming, have existed since ancient times. How can you not know? Those so-called scholarly sects are merely clowns. How can they be compared to the profound heritage of scholarly families? However, Junior isn't a scholarly cultivator. My Danliang country was also a Dao sect in the past. Junior doesn't understand the specific situation of these scholarly families. I only know that these scholarly families are divided into 9 classes. Each class is divided into 2 levels, the first class and the second class. The 4 major families that Junior mentioned just now are the first class and the second class. Junior doesn't know which ones exactly. These scholarly families are the true masters of Hidden Immortal Continent. Alas, now isn't the time to talk about it in detail. When there's time in the future, Junior will explain it in detail to Senior." "Damn it. So that's how it is." Xiao Hua bitterly smiled. He always thought that scholarly cultivators were similar to Dao sections. Those scholarly sects like Chongyun sect and Tianji sect were the same as the cultivation sects of Xiaoyu continent. They were the mainstream of hidden, immortal continents cultivation. But he didn't expect that this so-called scholarly families were the true behemoths. Sweeping a glance at Xiao Jian, who had a bitter expression on his face, Xiao Hua knew that what he said was the common knowledge of hidden, immortal continent. Everyone should know about it, especially cultivators like him. He also couldn't blame Xiao Jian for not reminding him. Anyone who saw that divine dragon horse and that golden carriage wouldn't know that this was the appearance of the peak character of hidden, immortal continent. Those people couldn't wait to hide. Instead, he had a dispute with them. Moreover, looking at the appearance of that muscular man wearing golden armor, he didn't seem to be willing to let the matter go. It was really troublesome. Senior. Xiao Jian's previously upright face began to look shifty. He looked left and right and said in a low voice, Junior saw that this Duamu Gongzi wasn't a broad-minded person. Just now, he was restrained by this Zhu Gongzi and couldn't get angry. But that Zhu Gongzi's meaning was obvious. Since it was Zhai Xinglu's guest, he wouldn't let Duamu Gongzi take action. But if Zhai Xinglu left, he definitely wouldn't care. Junior saw that the coachman didn't drive the carriage in. Maybe he's doing something outside. We might as well take advantage of this opportunity. Although Xiao Jian didn't say the word slip, Xiao Hua understood. Even Lu Yi's face showed the same expression. Hee. Xiao Hua sneered. We came here on behalf of Dao sects. If we don't even enter Zhai Xinglu's door, wouldn't our Dao sect's reputation be thrown away by us? Dao sects? What reputation does Dao sects have? How come I don't know about it? Xiao Jian muttered, Dao sect's reputation is worthless compared to brothel girls, right? What did you say? Xiao Hua frowned. When Xiao Jian heard this, he hurriedly laughed. Nothing. Senior, Junior just felt that, compared to your previous cautiousness, is rather different. Is that so? How come this Xiao doesn't know? When you first came to River Tide Temple, you acted exactly like an ordinary person. Junior even thought that you were sent by someone else. Even when facing the bald donkeys from Shaojian Temple, you were still extremely humble. With your methods of dealing with bandits, you didn't even need to lift a finger. Even that pet beast of yours could completely exterminate the monks from Shaojian Temple. You even used an extremely ugly wooden club to scare them. Shaojian laughed. But what about today? Actually, you could have avoided that carriage and even that whip. Especially, even if you took the whip and didn't let go, and didn't throw the coachman off the carriage. Wouldn't that have prevented all of this from happening in the future? Also, you actually rushed into the dragon horse and subdued the dragon horse in front of everyone. This isn't Senior's usual behavior of keeping a low profile. Hiss. Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. As a bystander, Xiao Jian saw everything clearly. What Xiao Jian said was the truth. If he had retreated half a step like before, he wouldn't have retreated. As long as he had reason and evidence, he wouldn't have offended this so-called first-rate Duanmu family's young master. However, he actually dragged the coachman off the carriage. He, a Jindan cultivator, actually had to lower himself to the same level as an aura refining brute. -11. Chapter 32:55. Damn it, Xiao Hua scolded. I don't know why, but this Xiao seems to be a bit impatient. Daoist, that coachman and Duamu Gongzi deserve to die. If the dragon horse didn't stop in time, we would have been injured if not dead. Lu Yi encouraged Xiao Hua from the side. In the marketplace, this little one has seen many hedonistic sons trampling children to death. If Senior was as young as you, he would naturally be so impulsive. Xiao Jian laughed. But Senior is a successful cultivator. You can't be impulsive. Perhaps, Senior saw Dao Shan's predicament and saw the prosperity of Bright Moon Lane and felt resentment? That should be the case. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and immediately understood, nodding slightly. Although the reaction of the whip was only a slight tremble, the difference was huge. He had never been impulsive at this moment. He could only explain it this way. Xiao Hua understood, but in reality, was this matter so simple? Was it because of these reasons of material joy and personal sorrow? Then Louis blinked his eyes and muttered in a low voice, "Don't care about this." Xiao Hua waved his hand and looked at the Zhai Xinglu that they had already reached. When a horse reaches the mountain, there will be a path. With so many people watching, how can we easily leave? Of course. Xiao Hua changed the topic and laughed. Even if we want to leave, we must first step into the Zhai Xinglu, then we can talk. As he spoke, Xiao Hua's eyes began to look around. Hee, Taoist, you and the others go in first. This little one will look around, or see if there is a back door in this Zhai Xinglu. Louis followed behind Xiao Hua, laughing and saying a few words. He immediately walked to the side and faced a young man in green clothes not far away. Seeing Xiao Hua return to his previous vigilance, Xiao Jian's hanging heart also settled down. Xiao Hua could fly, and he also had an extremely powerful pet to rely on. Xiao Jian, other than the remnants of his divine sense, had nothing else. It was impossible for him to protect himself. If Xiao Hua had a conflict with Duanmu Gongzi, Xiao Hua would bear the brunt of it, followed by Xiao Jian. Therefore, Xiao Jian absolutely did not want Xiao Hua to go against Duanmu Gongzi, no matter from which angle. Oh, this star-picking tower can actually block the probing of divine will. Xiao Hua looked at the huge screen in front of Zhai Xinglu's door and scanned it with his divine perception. He was somewhat surprised. But this seems to be the so-called primordial array of Confucian cultivators. Although it also uses the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, the fluctuations are not similar to my Dao sex formation. It looks a little crude. If I were to use the secret art of the sun shrouding art, this essence formation might not be able to block my spiritual sense. With that thought in mind, Xiao Hua stepped into Zhai Xinglu and his gaze landed on the screen in front of him. Xiao Hua had only been thinking about Zhai Xinglu's primordial array and had not noticed the screen. But when his gaze swept across the screen, he saw specks of starlight and pieces of moonlight falling on the screen like falling frost. His gaze was instantly drawn to it. Moreover, when his gaze landed on the screen, it was as if he saw a giant hand rising from the stars and moon and grabbing at the thousands of stars in the sky. Hiss. Xiao Hua's divine perception naturally could not fall into it, but at this moment, Xiao Hua felt that his divine perception was showing signs of rapidly dissipating. In particular, there were two spots on the screen that immediately alerted Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua could not help but gasp as his heart turned upside down. Although this giant hand cannot be compared to the karmic hand in my space, it is still inferior to the karmic hand in my space. However, the trajectory of this giant hand, picking the stars, is a little similar. It is even more powerful than the nascent soul hand of the Dao sect on the Dawn Rain continent. This Zhai Xinglu is actually this powerful? Although the nascent soul hand is extremely powerful, that is because the nascent soul communicates with heaven and earth, uses the power of heaven and earth spirit qi. Compared to the abstract, indescribable principles or rules, yes, rules, this giant hand contains, it is far inferior. Just a screen from Zhai Xinglu is already so imposing. No, that's not all. Just a screen from Zhai Xinglu in the Copper Pillar country in Yu province is already so powerful. Then what kind of a monster is the so-called alliance? Oh, perhaps. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua was somewhat enlightened. The first-class Duanmu family actually gave such face to a scholar like Brother Zhu, to Zhai Xinglu. Perhaps this Zhai Xinglu is controlled by one of the four great families? Also, the light of the stars and moon is being grasped by this giant hand. This rule is so powerful that it seems to be able to absorb the power of the stars and moon. Although I can also absorb starlight from the extraterritorial domain, other than knowing that it can be used in alchemy, I know nothing else. This Zhai Xinglu placing this screen here, what does it mean? Does it mean that they have the ability to use the power of starlight? Hee, Brother Zhu, look. This little Taoist has indeed entered Zhai Xinglu. I knew it. He must be trying to use Zhai Xinglu's power to hide. Only 3 of them came in, and the little fellow is not here. He must have gone elsewhere to gather information. In a rather luxurious room in Zhai Xinglu, young Master Duanmu held a luminous goblet in his hand as he took a sip of the blood-red wine. Scholar Zhu was also holding a goblet of wine. He smiled as he looked at a bronze mirror in front of him. The bronze mirror reflected the scene in front of Zhai Xinglu. Young Master Duanmu, why are you so serious with a little fellow? Scholar Zhu chuckled. It's just a dilapidated Taoist sect and a little Taoist with some strength. Hee. Young Master Duanmu's lips curled into a cold smile. Young Master Zhu, don't underestimate this little Taoist. My Duanmu family's dragon horse is actually so easy to subdue. Didn't you see Qiri and Xiaoyue nearly kneeling under his arms? Didn't you see Lu Guang and Xing not dare to provoke him? This little Taoist's body definitely has the strength of 10 dragons and 10 elephants. Oh, the Buddhist sect's mighty Vajra? Young Master Zhu was taken aback and asked curiously, I've never heard of any Taoist divine ability of dragons and elephants. This isn't something I should know. Young Master Duanmu shrugged. Actually, to be honest, it was Achio's rashness. This fellow shouldn't have raised his whip so casually. As long as young master knows. Young Master Zhu laughed and raised his luminous cup to young Master Duanmu. The two took a sip. What a pity. This little Taoist's luck isn't good. After a mouthful of wine, young Master Duanmu glanced at the bronze mirror and said regretfully, It's fine if he grabbed Achio's whip, but I would definitely reprimand Achio, who wouldn't do such a thing to save face. But he just had to drag Achio down from the golden carriage. If it was a month ago, it wouldn't have mattered even if he had dragged Achio down. He's just a golden armored soldier. With young Master Zhu's words, I might not lower myself to the same level as him. Could it be? Young Master Zhu's curiosity grew as he asked curiously. Young Master Duanmu's tone became even more regretful. What a pity. Because of Achio's loyalty, the clan changed his surname a month ago. Now, Achio's name is Duanmu Chio. See. Young Master Zhu sucked in a breath of cold air as if he had a toothache. He looked helplessly at the bronze mirror and said with pity, Poor little Taoist. This is the face of the Duanmu clan. Even if young Master Duanmu doesn't want to pay attention to it, I'm afraid you can't back down now. What's this little Taoist doing? Why is he standing in front of the screen motionless? However, when young Master Zhu saw Xiaohua standing in front of the screen and quietly looking at it, he couldn't help but be shocked. The wine in the luminous cup in his hand suddenly spilled out. It was dark red as if blood had dripped onto the thick silk carpet on the ground. What's wrong? Young Master Duanmu was also startled. He glanced at it and smiled. This fellow is probably thinking, should he go in? Or what should he do? Young Master Duanmu. Unexpectedly, young Master Zhu didn't smile at all. He placed the luminous cup in his hand on the brocade table beside him and bowed solemnly. I have a presumptuous request, but I'm not sure if I should say it. Zhu Qing. Young Master Duanmu saw this and also placed his luminous cup on the brocade table. He said lightly, I've known you for many years, and you know my character. Today, I came to Zhai Xinglu because of our friendship. If it were any other matter, I would have just laughed it off. But this concerns the reputation of the Duanmu family. I have already made myself clear just now. You just don't want young Master Zhu to speak, right? That scholar named Zhu Qing bitterly smiled. He pointed his finger at Xiaohua and said, At this point, Zhu Qing seemed to realize something and shook his head. Forgive me for not being able to tell young master about this. This is Zhai Xinglu's internal affairs. Oh, young Master Duanmu seemed to have understood something. He looked at the bronze mirror and pursed his lips resentfully. How about this, young Master Zhu? On account of our friendship, I promise not to kill him personally. As for others, I can't guarantee it. You also know that Achio has a bad temper. I came here with him from afar and didn't inform anyone. I'm sure he has already informed someone. Of course, young Master Zhu, I don't want to see Zhai Xinglu strike. Good. A smile appeared on Zhu Qing's face. I knew that young Master Duanmu isn't the kind of dandy that people say you are. Haha, whether I'm a dandy or not, I know very well. Young Master Duanmu stretched lazily and said, The auction will start in an hour. I'll go down and take a look first. Okay, Zhu Qing nodded and said, Young Master, please go ahead. I have important matters to attend to and can't accompany you. Go ahead, do your thing. Young Master Duanmu waved his hand casually. I hope that the next time I see you, you won't be in bronze pillar state. -11. Chapter 3256. Thank you for your auspicious words. Zhu Qing smiles, but immediately warns, that's right, today's auction is a bit strange. The items being auctioned are strange. Look carefully before you act. In particular, there are some people I can't see through who are participating in this auction. Don't join in the fun. Even I can't? Young Master Duanmu's face shows a strange expression. That's right, you can't. Because I can't stop them from coming. Zhu Qing says word by word, then hurriedly leaves. Today is really strange. Looking at Zhu Qing's back, young Master Duanmu looks at the bronze mirror again. In front of the screen, Xiao Hua has already left. I just came to Zhai Xinglu and met the little Taoist who dares to oppose the dragon horse. The auction hasn't even started yet. There's actually something that even young Master Duanmu can't join in on. What kind of world is this? Do they still want people to live? Xiao Hua stands in front of the screen and watches the large hand merge the light of the moon and stars into it. The large hand then follows his divine sense and turns into two large words. Yes, in the end, Xiao Hua already realized that everything on the screen moves according to his divine sense. Seeing the two large words, star and moon, appear on the screen and dissipate like stardust, Xiao Hua seems to understand something. Star and Moon Alliance. This is the Star and Moon Alliance that Xiao Jin mentioned. Senior? Xiao Hua's gaze has yet to move away from the screen when Xiao Jin's voice rings in his ear. Senior, have you made a decision? Do you want to leave now, or wait for Brother Lu to find the back door? You keep standing here. I'm afraid it's not appropriate, right? Oh, Xiao Hua comes to his senses and looks up. Indeed, not far from him. The green-clothed youths are looking at him with a smile that isn't a smile. They think that Xiao Hua is delaying something. Taoist. It is at this moment that Lu Yi quietly sneaks over and says in a low voice, I've already found out that there's only one entrance to Zhai Xinglu. There are no exits anywhere else. In a while, when the auction is over, everyone will have to leave from here. Senior, let's go. There's no time to lose. Xiao Jin glanced behind him. There, for dragon horses had just pulled the golden carriage into the signboard. Under the guidance of two green-clothed youths, they were ready to stop in front of the door. You can go back first, Xiao Hua said with a smile. Since this old man is here, I will go and take a look. After saying that, Xiao Hua flicked his sleeve and walked towards the side of the screen. All right, Xiao Jin said helplessly. Since Senior isn't leaving, then Junior won't leave either. Junior will go through thick and thin with Senior. There's no need. Xiao Hua waved his hand. Offending the Duanmu family has nothing to do with you. None of you have any cultivation, so they won't bother with you. I hope so. Xiao Jin smiled bitterly. Senior, you don't know that those playboys love to vent their anger on others. Xiao Hua's brows raised up and he said with a smile, Yeah, you understand this matter best. However, since this Duanmu family is a first-rate family, how could it possibly be so superficial? What could Xiao Jin say? He felt that although Xiao Hua's strength was unfathomable, he might not be as familiar with the human heart as he was. However, he really didn't dare to leave Xiao Hua's side. He didn't dare to take the risk and be killed by that golden-armored man. That fellow was even more powerful than Yuanya. This place is somewhat interesting. Xiao Jin's mind was filled with thoughts. However, when he turned around the screen and saw the situation in front of him, he couldn't help but be slightly stunned. He saw that this place was about 1 mu in size. It was several times bigger than what he had seen from the outside. Within this 1 mu of space, the first thing to bear the brunt was the star atlas above his head. This star atlas flickered with various colors of light, enveloping the entire hall. Between each starlight, there was a separate grid. This starlight also separated the situation within the grid, making it impossible for the naked eye to see the situation within. What was special was that every starlight that was separated from the grid was rising up and down, like a mist. The entire space looked like it was filled with thousands of starlights, very dazzling and magnificent. Even someone like Xiao Jian was slightly dazed, not to mention Lu Yi and Yuanya. They were like country bumpkins with their mouths wide open and their eyes filled with amazement. It looked as if they wanted to dig out their own eyeballs and throw them into the starlight. Taoist priest, this way please. Since Xiao Hua and the others had moved, the cyan-clothed youth also moved. He politely reminded Xiao Hua and the others, not laughing at Lu Yi and the others' loss of self-control. The cyan-clothed youth pointed to a white jade door. The sparkling and translucent milky white jade was erected at the side of the screen. When the multicolored starlight fell on it, it created ripples of light that covered the area several feet around the white jade door like water ripples. Lead the way. Although Xiao Hua had never been a monarch, he had seen places even more dazzling than this starlight on the Dawn Rain continent. He had only glanced at it once before moving his gaze away. At this moment, he waved his hand and said indifferently, Taoist priest, this white jade door is not something that I can enter. The cyan-clothed youth said apologetically. There are other disciples of Zhai Xinglu waiting on it. Xiao Hua responded. He took a few steps forward and scanned the white jade door with his divine sense. He stepped inside, actually passing through the stone. Xiao Jian hesitated. He timidly released his pitiful divine sense, wanting to check it out. Then, he saw half of Xiao Hua's head poke out from the jade door. He said with a smile, just come in directly. Then, that head went back into the jade door. Xiao Jian's heart settled, and he walked in without thinking. As expected, there were no obstacles at all, nor were there any dangers. Xiao Jian only saw a flash of light in front of him, and in front of him was a passage that looked like a galaxy, appearing right under his feet. In front of him was a constellation surrounded by nebulas. Behind Xiao Jian, Yuanya and Lu Yi also entered. The two of them could not help but cry out in surprise. Yeah, Xiao Jian snorted coldly. Don't say that you know this old man. Yes, master. Yuanya forcefully suppressed the shock in his heart and respectfully replied. Not far away, a woman in palace attire happened to pass by. Hearing Xiao Jian and Yuanya's conversation, she could not help but cover her mouth and laugh. However, the woman immediately took a deep breath, placed her hands on her waist, and bowed. She respectfully said, Fellow Taoists, if you wish to enter the Star Palace to trade, please pay a low-grade origin stone. Oh, isn't this the auction? Xiao Hua was naturally the first to ask. Reporting to Taoist priest, the woman said with a smile, Our Zhai Xinglu's auction will be held in Xinglu in an hour. This is only the Star Palace for ordinary transactions. There are many fellow Taoists like you. They did not come to the Star Palace to participate in the auction. Their purpose is to trade with other fellow Taoists. If you want to enter the Star Palace to trade with them, you have to pay a primal stone in exchange for a star token. Only Taoists with star tokens can enter the Star Palace. A low-grade primal stone. Xiao Jian was flabbergasted. Why doesn't your Zhai Xinglu rob people? That's too expensive. If I want to trade with others, I can do it outside. Why must I do it in your Zhai Xinglu Star Palace? Taoist priest is right. It's only in this Star Palace that no one will rob you. My Zhai Xinglu can guarantee the safety of the items you trade inside. The woman was not angry at all. Of course, my Zhai Xinglu cannot guarantee the authenticity of the items you trade. A low-grade primal stone can be traded inside, right? Search the Star Palaces one by one. Xiao Hua asked again. If we also want to make a small Star Palace like this, how many primal stones would we have to pay if we took out our items to trade? 10 low-grade primal stones. The woman answered cleanly. 10 low-grade primal stones. Not one mid-grade primal stone? Xiao Hua stared blankly, then understood. The primal stone exchange in Hidden Immortal Continent might be different from Dawn Rain Continent. Thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua waved his hand and took out a mid-grade primal stone from the space. He handed it to the woman and said, Give me 4 star tokens, the kind that can only be traded with others. Yes. Seeing Xiao Hua being so generous, the woman was very happy. But when she took the primal stone from Xiao Hua's hand, She smiled bitterly and said, "If I'm not wrong, Taoist priests should be a mid-grade primal stone. Do you have any low-grade primal stones?" "I don't have enough low-grade primal stones to give Taoist priest." "Oh, right." Xiao Hua thought of something and asked, "Can Zhaixing Lu exchange primal stones for gold and silver?" "Of course." The woman nodded. "Could it be that Taoist priest wants to use this primal stone to exchange for some gold and silver?" "Yes, exchange the rest for silver." "Then please wait a moment," the woman said with a smile. "I will exchange for you now." However, Zhaixing Lu takes a 10% cut to exchange for gold and silver. "I hope Taoist priest will forgive me." "Oh? How much silver can one low-grade primal stone exchange for?" Xiao Hua, who had always been stingy, felt a little heartache. "I'll let Taoist priest know that one low-grade primal stone can be exchanged for 10 taels of gold. If Zhaixing Lu takes 1 tael, Taoist priest will actually get 9 taels of gold. This, outside. One low-grade primal stone can be exchanged for 15 taels of gold." Xiao Jian said with some displeasure. "Why is your Zhaixing Lu so shady?" "Hee, Taoist priest, it's up to you." Hearing this, the woman stood still and looked at Xiao Hua, then at Xiao Jian. "This is my Zhaixing Lu's rule. However, I advise Taoist priest that it's safer to exchange at Zhaixing Lu. Others may not have so much gold. Go ahead and exchange quickly." Xiao Hua waved his hand, indicating for the woman to leave. Then he glared fiercely at Xiao Jian. Xiao Jian hurriedly nodded, knowing that Xiao Hua hated him for losing those primal stones. Yes, even if one low-grade primal stone could be exchanged for 1 tael of gold, how much gold could he exchange for with so many primal stones? He had lost so much gold. -11. Chapter 32:57. How many low-grade primeval stones can be exchanged for 1 mid-grade primeval stone? Xiao Hua asked coldly. 100 pieces. Xiao Jian's sweat dripped down immediately. "Then you had so many primeval stones. How could you lose them all at once?" As expected, Xiao Hua asked. That. Xiao Jian stammered and finally told the truth. "At first, it was 1 primeval stone, worth 100 taels of gold, but they didn't want to play with me. In the end, I had no choice but to exchange one for 10 taels. 1 taels, after losing a few rounds. After losing a few rounds, they all had primeval stones. Who cares how much gold these primeval stones can be exchanged for?" Lu Yi originally didn't know the grades of primeval stones. When he heard that Xiao Jian actually lost primeval stones of unknown grades, he couldn't help but feel his heart ache. He stood at the side and muttered. But when Xiao Jian heard this, he slightly straightened his back and said in a low voice, "Brother Lu, no matter if those primeval stones are mid-grade or top-grade, they are all mine." As he said this, Xiao Jian stole a glance at Xiao Hua, afraid that Xiao Hua would say something. Unfortunately, Xiao Hua's face didn't have any reaction. Xiao Jian was right. These primeval stones were all Xiao Jian's own. What he used them for was his own business. Even if he lost all his money and lived on the streets, that was Xiao Jian's own business. Xiao Hua wasn't Xiao Jian's great-grandfather. Why would he care about this? Lu Yi's heart ached for the gold he had never seen before, so he muttered a few words. Seeing that Xiao Hua ignored him, he immediately shut his mouth. Only Yuanya, from Seven Suns Temple to Bright Moon Lane and finally to Star-Plucking Tower, didn't say much. It was as if everything in this mortal world had a huge impact on him. In Longevity Town, he originally thought that he already knew everything, but now he knew that what he knew was just a drop in the ocean. Regardless of whether it was Bright Moon Lane's luxury or Star-Plucking Tower's grandeur, they were all things he couldn't even dream of. His eyes only looked at the stars. The starlight was the so-called Star Palace, and it was somewhat blurred. Moments later, the woman returned with a small Qinkuan pouch in one hand and 2 tokens in the other. Taoist Elder. The woman did not pass the small Qinkuan pouch to Xiao Hua. Instead, she passed the copper-colored token to Xiao Hua and said, "This is the star token that I told Taoist sect is worth 1 low-grade origin stone. You can enter the Star Palace of the other immortal elders to trade with them." Xiao Hua took the star tablet and saw a brilliant star engraved on it. When his finger touched it, a trace of roughness and coolness came from the star tablet. Clearly, the material of this star tablet was also specially made. And this? The woman handed another star token to Xiaohua and said with a smile, "This is a star token that can be used to rent a star palace in my star-picking tower. It's worth 10 low-grade primordial stones." Just now, I didn't explain it clearly to Taoist Elder, so I still have to explain it to Taoist Elder. Otherwise, I can't afford to delay Taoist Elder's trade. Oh. Xiaohua took the silver star token and played with it for a while. Seeing the two brilliant stars engraved on it, he could not see any difference from the bronze star token. He could not help but smile and say, "What's the clue? Lady, please explain it." That bronze star token can only be entered one star palace at a time to trade with the immortal elders. If Taoist Elder still wants to trade with other immortal elders, then you can only go to another star palace to trade. Moreover, if Taoist Elder wants something, you can only look for it one by one. The woman's words were clear and her voice was pleasant to the ear. But this silver star token is different. If Taoist Elder takes it, not only can you rent a star palace and wait for other immortal elders to come to trade, you can also write what you want to find on the star token. The contents of the star token can be shown to the immortal elders of the other star palaces. In other words, Taoist Elder can stay in a star palace and know what the immortal elders of the other star palaces want to trade. This saves Taoist Elder the trouble of searching. It's so convenient. Xiaohua's eyes brighten. Then can this old man also know what is in other people's small chinquin bag? Of course. The woman pursed her lips and says with a smile, "Other than the things the immortal elders of the star palaces are not willing to show, everything else can be seen. How do we trade?" Xiaohua's interest is piqued. How do two people in the star palaces trade? This Taoist Elder will have to go by himself. The woman says apologetically, "It's better for the immortal elders to trade with their own hands. If you give it to my Zhai Xinglu, it will be traded at the auction later." Okay, this old man wants a silver star token. Xiaohua nods and says, "This silver star token is really convenient and is really worth 10 low-grade primordial stones." The woman's face shows a smile. She points at the silver star token in Xiaohua's hand and says, "Taoist Elder's star palace is at Hong 446. Taoist Elder can enter with this star token." Then she passes the small chinquin bag in her hand to Xiaohua. Inside are the other two star tokens and the remaining gold. "Taoist Elder, please count them." Hee. Xiaohua laughs and takes the small chinquin bag. "Miss is really smart. How did you know this old man would definitely want this silver star token?" More than 90 low-grade primordial stones and 10 low-grade primordial stones for convenience. Anyone who hears this will be moved. Don't you think so? The woman doesn't hide it and says with a smile, "Just now, this servant left in a hurry and didn't have time to tell you. Now that this servant has said it, won't Taoist Elder understand?" Xiaohua laughs loudly. That's right, back in the Xiaoyu continent, one mid-grade primordial stone could only be exchanged for 10 low-grade primordial stones. Now, he can exchange for 100 in one go. Taking out 10 for convenience, Xiaohua can really accept it. He doesn't even have the interest to count the remaining gold. With a wave of his hand, he wants to put the small chinquin bag away. This time, the woman is very anxious and says embarrassedly, "Taoist Elder, this small chinquin bag is my Zhai Xinglu's public use. It doesn't belong to this servant. Taoist Elder, please take away the things inside and return the small chinquin bag to this servant." Hee. This old man is used to taking it. Xiaohua smiles embarrassedly and puts the things inside his space. He passes the small chinquin bag to the woman and says with a smile, "How many primordial stones is this small chinquin bag? How about this old man give you primordial stones?" The woman takes the small chinquin bag and says with a smile, "My Zhai Xinglu also has things for sale in the Star Palace. The small chinquin bag and other items should be inside. It's in Sky number 1. If Taoist Elder is interested, you can go take a look. In addition, the location of each Star Palace and even the Star Palace that Taoist Elder rents are all in this star token. Taoist Elder can use Taoist's divine sense to check it." "Oh?" Xiaohua raises his eyebrows and says curiously, "Could it be that the star tokens of Taoist, Confucian, and Buddhist are different. It's the same. The woman replies, this star token can be inspected by divine sense, Buddhist awareness, eye-clearing technique, and even primordial thoughts. See? Xiao Hua is slightly shocked. He didn't expect this star token to be so powerful. Xiao Hua passes the other 3 bronze star tokens to Xiao Jian and the other 2. However, he suddenly thinks of something and hurriedly asks, that's right, can this star token hide one's appearance? Of course it can. The woman says proudly, as long as you trade in my Zhai Xing Lu, this star token can attract starlight and hide Taoist elder's appearance. No matter what Taoist elder trades, it will be impossible for others to know. Good. Xiao Hua claps his hands. While praising in his heart, he becomes even more curious about the Star-Moon Alliance. The auction on the Dawn Rain continent doesn't seem to be done so well. The woman keeps the small Qinkuan bag and places her hands on her waist. She says with a smile, this servant wishes Taoist elders a smooth trade in my Zhai Xing Lu and a successful one. After saying that, the woman leaves very obediently and doesn't stay for a moment longer. Fellow Taoist Xiao, you can take a look around yourself. Xiao Hua looks at the star path under his feet and then looks at the stars one by one. He says, if there's anything you like, you can come to Hong 46's Star Palace to find this Xiao. But Louis stares blankly at the side and says in a low voice, Taoist elder, where is Hong 46? These stars don't look any different. Wait a moment. Xiao Hua takes the silver star token and infuses it with his divine sense. Sure enough, inside the star token is a star chart similar to the Star Palace in this space. Heaven 1, Earth 2, Mystic 3, Yellow 4 are all marked. And not far away, the one with the special word is Hong 46. Xiao Hua doesn't know how to explain it to Lu Yi. He passes the star token to Xiao Jian and says, take a look for yourself and come find this Xiao in a while. Yes. Xiao Jian takes the star token and infuses it with his divine sense. After a while, he withdraws his divine sense with a shocked expression on his face. Although he was once the ruler of a country, he has never seen such a scene before. Xiao Hua takes the star token from Xiao Jian, looks at Xiao Jian with interest and asks, did you see it clearly? Junior understands. Xiao Jian says respectfully, if Junior needs anything, I will definitely find Senior. All right, Xiao Hua waves his hand, turns around and walks towards Hong 46 with large strides. As he walks, he says, this Xiao also wishes you to find what you want. That's right. Xiao Jian only had his spiritual force but no cultivation. Although Xiao Hua didn't investigate his situation, it was obvious that Xiao Jian's cultivation had been crippled. Xiao Jian probably came to Bright Moon Lane and Bronze Pillar State to find a way to restore his cultivation. However, Xiao Hua really doesn't understand. Since he already has primeval stones, he might be able to find a spirit pill similar to the heavenly pill in this auction. Why was Xiao Jin able to lose all of his primeval stones in one night? Xiao Hua didn't use any flying talisman, but as he takes large strides, thousands of stars flashed from afar and gathered under his feet, like stars surrounding the moon, sending him forward. Xiao Hua was a Jindan stage cultivator who had flown in the sky and experienced the heavenly Tao starry sky. Walking on this kind of star chart, he felt relaxed and happy. How could Yuan Ye and Lu Yi, who had never cultivated before, be fascinated by it? -11. Chapter 32:58. The star path was winding, and after a star fell, Xiao Hua saw a scholar wearing black clothes walk out with a smile on his face. Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and walked over with a silver star card in his hand. When Xiao Hua was about a foot away from the star cluster, he saw a smoke-like star dust rush out from the star cluster and land on the star card in Xiao Hua's hand. Puff! A silver brilliance burst out from the star token, completely covering Xiao Hua. At the same time, a thin vortex appeared in the middle of the star token. This vortex turned into a star bridge in a moment, and specks of starlight emerged from the vortex and fell under Xiao Hua's feet. When Xiao Hua's feet moved slightly, the star bridge automatically retracted and took Xiao Hua into the star cluster. After entering the star cluster, Xiao Hua's eyes lit up. It was several feet wide and looked like a study room. Inside the study room, Not only were the 4 treasures of the study placed on the desk, there was also a bookcase and a bed in front of the window. There was even a palm leaf fan placed in the corner of the study room. However, through the window of the study room, there was no scenery outside. "Fellow immortal, please." A voice came. In front of the empty desk, a ray of light appeared and slowly fell from top to bottom. Immediately, a silver human figure formed by countless star dust gradually appeared. The voice came from the mouth of this human figure. "Fellow immortal." Xiao Hua looked down and sure enough, he had also turned into a human figure formed by silver star dust. He smiled in his heart and cupped his hands in greeting. That person stretched out his hand and said, "Fellow immortal, please sit." I wonder what fellow immortal has taken a fancy to? Seeing that person sit down, Xiaohua also sat on a chair not far from the desk and said with a smile, "Fellow immortal, what do you have here?" "Oh, look, fellow immortal also has a silver figure. Didn't you also rent a star palace?" That person asked curiously. "It's inside fellow immortal's star palace." Xiaohua didn't hide it and said with a smile, "Hee, I just came in and haven't entered the star palace yet. I just happened to pass by here, so I came in to take a look. If fellow immortal has something good, I'll definitely buy it. It's also good to have a prize." When that person heard this, he smiled and said, "Fellow immortal really has vitality stones. You're only renting the star palace for 2 hours, and there's only an hour left before the auction starts. Instead of going to your own star palace to look at other people's things, you're here to stroll around. Forget it, this is what I want to trade this time. Take a look." As he spoke, that person pointed with his finger. A book flew out from the desk and landed in front of Xiaohua. "Many thanks." Xiaohua took it and was about to open it, but the book flashed and a string of words flowed on the book. It turned out that this book was just a decoration. "Oh, I understand." Xiaohua's eyes focused on the contents of the book, but he suddenly realized something in his heart. This so-called star palace should be a small illusion array. Everything can be arranged according to master's wishes through the star tablet. This book? Xiaohua thought for a moment and saw that the contents of the book were either calligraphy or painting, ink brushes, and even rice paper. He couldn't help but stare blankly. What use did he have for this thing? He originally wanted to ask, but there wasn't enough time, so he didn't dare to delay and hurriedly looked at the back. Fortunately, after the 4 treasures of the study, there were some spiritual herbs and spiritual pills. Of course, the medicines written on the book weren't Taoist medicinal pills. Unfortunately, Xiaohua could understand the names of these medicines, but he didn't know the specific effects. He simply stopped looking and handed the book to that person, saying with a smile, "Fellow immortal, you've made ample preparations for this transaction." "Hee, fellow immortal, are you different?" That person took the book and said with a smile, "I wonder what fellow immortal has taken a fancy to?" "Fellow immortal, do you have the extreme magnetic origin light?" Xiaohua asked. That person was obviously stunned. After a moment, he asked curiously, "What's the extreme magnetic origin light?" "Hee, forget it." Xiaohua stood up. "If fellow immortal doesn't have it, then forget it. I really haven't heard of this thing before. I'm very sorry." That person didn't get angry. He also stood up and said with a smile, "However, fellow immortal, do you have the 1,000-year-old perpetual morning grass? If you do, I can pay a high price for it." Perpetual morning grass? Xiaohua frowned. There were countless strange flowers and herbs in his space, but he really hadn't heard of this thing before. However, he immediately understood and said with a smile, "I do have some spiritual herbs here, but I don't understand plants and vegetation. I wonder which one fellow immortal is talking about?" "Oh, I'm talking about this thing." That person waved his hand, and a silver ball of light appeared on his hand made of stardust. Then, that person pointed at this ball of light, and a ball of light rushed out from it and landed on the wall of the study. A picture scroll appeared on the wall, and it was precisely a stalk of exquisite grass. Hee, so it's exquisite grass. Xiaohua understood. If this person in front of him was a cultivator, he would probably be at the peak of the qi refining stage. He should be using this exquisite grass to build his foundation. Xiaohua waved his hand, and a 2,000-year-old exquisite grass was taken out from the space. He handed it to that person with a smile and said, "What a coincidence. I have a 2,000-year-old exquisite grass here. I wonder what fellow immortal is willing to exchange for it." That person's body trembled a bit. He impatiently stretched out his hand and took the exquisite grass. After identifying it, he hurriedly said, "Fellow immortal, I will give you 10 high-grade primordial stones. What do you think?" "What? 10? 10 high-grade primordial stones?" Xiao Hua almost cried out in shock. That person said very embarrassedly, "I know this number is a bit low. Then, how about 11 high-grade primordial stones? This is the most that I can take out. Of course, this is still not enough for a 2,000-year-old perpetual sorrow grass, but I only need a 1,000-year-old one." Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. If this 2,000-year-old exquisite grass was in the EG of the Dawn Rain continent, wouldn't it be worth 1 top-grade primordial stone? How come it was only 10 high-grade primordial stones here? The difference wasn't small at all. Seeing that Xiao Hua was still hesitating, that person took the booklet again and handed it to Xiao Hua, saying, "How about this, fellow immortal? Take a look again. You can choose anything inside." Xiao Hua thought for a moment and said, "I have all the 4 treasures of the study in here. Do you have any materials for refining? Oh, right, or cultivation methods. No matter if it's Confucian, Buddhist, or Taoist, they're all fine." "Oh, so fellow immortal wants these." That person understood. He picked up the booklet and pointed at it again, saying, "I have some materials for refining imperial tools here. However, they're not particularly precious and aren't worth many primordial stones. As for cultivation methods, I really don't have them here." Xiao Hua picked up the booklet and took a look. Indeed, the materials inside were all ordinary materials. He didn't fancy them either. Fellow immortal. Xiao Hua was helpless. He handed the booklet to that person and shook his head, saying, "These things, they're really not worth primordial stones." Fellow immortal. Fellow immortal. That person almost stepped forward and pulled Xiao Hua, saying with a smile, "How about I exchange all of these with fellow immortal?" All of them? Xiao Hua was stunned. That person heard that there was hope and said with a smile, "Yes, although these things are worth close to 20 high-grade primordial stones, but I really need this endless sorrow grass. If you don't mind, you can take all of these things." "Ha ha ha ha." Xiao Hua appeared stunned and then laughed loudly. Xiao Hua's laughter was really somewhat unruly, causing that person to be somewhat at a loss. He looked at Xiao Hua very strangely. After the time it took to finish half a cup of tea, Xiao Hua stopped laughing and said, "How about this, fellow immortal? I don't want these things anymore. Why don't you see if there are any other strange things? If it's possible, I don't want these things anymore." Strange things? That person was even more stunned. He thought for a moment and said, "You mean, as long as it's strange, it's okay?" "Of course." Xiao Hua nodded, "Yes, as long as it's strange and of unknown origin. It's okay." Strange and of unknown origin. That person pondered for a moment and seemed to have a plan. He nodded and said, "I understand. Can you wait for a moment?" "Sure." Xiao Hua was happy. He liked strange things the most. Sure enough, that person went out for a moment and came back. He took out a jade box and handed it to Xiao Hua, saying, "This thing belongs to a good friend of mine. Take a look, if it's okay. As long as it's strange and of unknown origin, I like it." Xiao Hua was very expectant. He reached out his hand and said with a smile, "This thing can't be said to be strange and of unknown origin." That person looked at Xiao Hua expectantly and said in a low voice. Xiao Hua opened the jade box and took a look. He hurriedly closed it and waved his hand to put it into the space. He said with a smile, "Not bad. It's this kind of thing of unknown origin that I like the most. That mournful, everlasting grass is yours." "Thank you very much, fellow immortal." That person was very happy and cupped his hands in thanks. Hee. Does fellow immortal's friend still have this thing? If there's more?" Xiao Hua asked with a smile. That person hurriedly waved his hand and said, "For this kind of thing of unknown origin, it's already rare to have one. How can there be more? Fellow immortal, If you still want it, you can tell me in the Star Palace. Xiaohua stood up and walked out of the Star Palace. He said while walking, "This thing, I don't dare to write it on the Star Palace." Hee, that's right. That person smiled as he watched Xiaohua walk out. He hurriedly waved his hand, and the entire study room immediately turned into nothingness. It was a starry night sky, and the human figure formed by the stardust had completely turned into a middle-aged scholar. The smile on that person's face had already disappeared. He looked at the small Chinkuan bag in his hand and said coldly, "If you want to get the Buddhist sect Saraira, you naturally can't write it on the Star Palace. This person actually has a 2,000-year-old mournful everlasting grass and also wants the Buddhist sect Saraira. I'm afraid he's a monster from somewhere." Today in Bright Moon Lane, there are a few Buddhist sect senior monks. This little one should leave early. -11.